Good morning, Morena, and welcome to our council meeting. And welcome to our team on Zoom. So we're doing the Zoom and in person again this morning. And so this morning, to open up our council meeting, invite Councillor Belsky. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to open our council meeting in prayer. Let us pray. Thank you, Father in heaven, for the opportunity to pray for our governing authority, that the decisions we make will enable the people of Manawatū to fulfil council's community outcomes. A place to belong and grow, a future planned together, an environment to be proud of, infrastructure fit for the future, a prosperous, resilient economy, value for money and excellence in local government. I pray and ask for wisdom, discernment, insight and understanding as we discuss and make decisions on the topics in our agenda today around this table that will benefit our communities. I pray for our Mayor, Councillors, CEO, management and staff who work together to make all this possible. I pray the Lord will bless you all in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have no apologies today. We have a full team and we have no requests for leave of absence. So we can go straight to item 4 on page 6. This is the confirmation of minutes. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Ford.
Your Worship, I move that the minutes of the council meeting held 19th of May 2022 be adopted as a true and correct record.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hadfield. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Item 5, declarations of interest. Are there any topics on our agenda today that elected members need to declare potential conflict? Councillor Campbell.
Your Worship, item 11.1. I'll declare an interest in that and participate.
Thank you. Any others? Councillor Ford.
Your Worship, I just note that I am a member of the Farmers Market Management Committee, which comes under the umbrella of Field and District Promotion. I don't see it as a conflict of interest, but I do wish to note it.
Thank you. Anything further? No? Thank you. Right, public forum. Now we understand James. Welcome, James. If you'd like to come up to the top of the table there, and you've got 5 minutes to speak to us, and then take any questions.
Yes. Is it down?
Absolutely, yes. I'm not sure what your topic was that you're talking to us today.
No, it's the we make good progress. Thank you for getting the bicycle road. Is it? You can actually drive on it when you shouldn't. That was because we got up to the Taunui stream, and then one of the officers said that actually it might be Trina, that the NZTA need to find some money. But what about Horizons? There's a Taunui Basin, and it's a dog-shaped culvert that doesn't exist. That they probably is going to say, well, we don't want the culvert any better anyway. And I think so much money to get to there, it'd have to carry on. And so then the next thing is the Kung Fu Corner. And I remember Colin Austin came with a plan to Kairinga meeting, and that's what he was going to do. And he was the sort of guy that just did what he wanted to do with the best advice that he could get. So how do the people get safely across there? It's the same problem that we, when I was in favour of a different route using, what are they called, the paper roads. But anyway, Michael finally went to the Army Council and the police, and is it $50,000 we pay now, Michael?
Just I can't remember.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a lot of money for not many people use it. And in the beginning, I was worried we'd never get through the native bush because that was secondary anyway. It's not versioned. it was, anyway, it's very good. But do I go to Horizons and tell them, sort out this culvert so we don't have to argue? Well, Hamish was who I wanted to talk to, but then Tina said, well, you'll find out something if you come to this meeting. And then, so my meeting with Mayor Helen will be about a scholarship matter anyway, if we don't talk about this.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for raising that, and I'll ask Hamish Waugh, our infrastructure manager, if he could give us all an update on the Palmy Fielding.
Thank you, Your Worship. So following an extended consent process, we now have resource consent to put the small pedestrian bridge structure over the Tanami Stream, where Mr. Beard is referred to. And we are continuing to work with Kiwi Rail around the deed of grant for the Tanami Road to Nanstead line section. Mr. Jones, who's our roading manager, is newly there. We've already got the deed of grant largely in place for the first item on our agenda. So that's, I would like to think, imminent. And the Cane Food Corner component is within Palmerston City Council, so it's outside what we'll be doing. Yeah. But I'd expect that you'll see the stream crossing in place 3 or 4 months, and hopefully with Kiwi Rail's blessing, we'll have the rest of it completed this side of Christmas.
Excellent. So there you go. You have the latest update.
Yeah,
like us.
yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And we look forward to seeing it finished. Thanks for your time. Right, item 7, there's no presentations and no late items this morning. No recommendations from committees, no minutes from other committees, and so we can go straight to officers' report 11.1 on page 14. This is the Aorangi Marae, the proposed right-hand turning bay, and today is about looking at the solution to fund the construction for the right-hand turning bay on Wars Road. So I'm going to hand this over to Hamish to take us through this. You recall we have had a workshop session on this, and today is about bringing a solution to the table.
Thank you, Your Worship. And yes, we've talked about this particular project on and off for a number of years now. And as Your Worship mentioned, we had a workshop discussion in the last couple of weeks. So the report starts on page 14 of your agenda. And essentially, you've seen the drawings and I guess the intent before. The hold-ups on this particular project have always been the proximity to the Wars Road Cameron's Line intersection, and therefore the NZTA interest in road safety, and also the width required for the right turn bay, which then overlaps into Kiwi Rail land. And obviously the Wars Road section, Manawatū District Council local roads. There's been 3 interested parties to do anything, and the Aorangi Marae have quite rightly outlined the road safety issues that are there. So if I refer you to sections 3.1, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the report, if you're driving down Wars Road out of Fielding to your immediately in front of you past the bridge, there's a right turn bay that turns over the railway line by the freezing works there. That's been in place for many, many years, back in the New Zealand Highway Agency's days, I think it was. If you go down further towards Bunnythorpe, you've then got the secret garden. So there is a requirement based on road safety for the secret garden to have a right turn bay into that, heading out of Fielding, and that was funded by the developer. Bypass the Cameron's Line intersection, bypass the Aorangi Marae, you've then got Tanui School, and you'll see another right turn bay there. And that was funded through the Safer Journeys for Schools program, identifying the road safety needs. So as I've outlined to council previously, the Aorangi Marae right turn bay has been an ongoing problem for us as to how do we fund it, given the way that the other 3 right turn bays were funded. And we've found a solution in terms of the unallocated roading budget for the current financial year to deliver these works. So that is our intention. If I just pick up on the recommendations, and thank you, Chief Executive, for outlining. We did outline 4 options in the report, and just to confirm that recommendation number 3 should include a reference to option D, which is what we're looking to proceed on. So So in summary, we have the support of the marae. We have conducted a full design, which is contained in the report. We've had an independent road safety assessment of that design, which has been completed. We're in the very final stages of the deed of grant from from Kiwi Rail for the 112 metres of land that we need to take to widen the road. And we're ready to proceed. So I'll take the recommendations as they are there, noting for council's to receive the report, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
I signed the deed of grant.
Oh, you had to.
It's reported to me for the week's deed of grant for that strip of land. You realise there's been some results.
Thank you.
That's great, because that was going to be my question on 3.9. How realistic do you believe it is that construction will start in October?
Based on the current comments from the Chief Executive, Berry.
Excellent.
That was the only thing we were waiting on. Everything else is in place. So, yeah.
July start, correct?
So we have a contractor lined up that is able to start the work.
We haven't lined up a contractor yet. We'll either go directly to Higgins as our roading maintenance provider, or we'll do an invited tender process given the value of the works in line with our procurement process. But confident of a delivery in the timeframes that we've outlined.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Short.
Thank you. As the former chair of Manawatū, I'm very pleased to see that we have found a solution to this. It had been on the agenda there many times over the years. I believe they've been requesting this for about 25 years. It's submitted to us, that's submitted to Horizons Regional Land Transport Committee, and I'm really pleased to find this been a workable solution. Because of course the marae was there first. It's been a victim of growth. It's been there since the mid to late 1800s. And of course, when it was built, there were no roads, there were no railway lines, and there were no low-flying airport areas. So I think it's great that we've been able to find a solution, remembering of course that their urupā is on the other side of the road, on Campbell Road as well. And that's still a bit of a mission for them. So if no one else wants to comment, I'm very happy to move it, but if there are other comments.
I'm happy to
Councillor Marsh.
I'm happy to thank you through the chair. Happy to second that. Just one query that I do have. Was I correct in your comment that all we're getting from Kiwi Rail is 112 square metres?
212.
212.
Yeah.
Just looking at that, because the whole thing's about 600 metres.
It's a 212 square metre section that we require.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, very happy to second that.
Councillor Belsky.
Do we have to purchase that land off Kiwi Rail?
No, deed of grant process is effectively they give us a right to occupy it.
Oh, yeah.
So they still retain ownership. A license fee, it's probably about $1,500 a year.
Okay.
So, and that's common for any stormwater culvert or any sort of arrangement where there's no overlap in property.
Yep.
They tend to protect the rail corridor.
Yes.
But the licensing fee covers any administration that they have on a perpetual basis.
Yes. Thanks, Hamish.
Thank you. Councillor Corrie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Oh, excuse me. I've got no problems with the design and construction of the turning bay. The only comment I'd make is in regard to the safety of pedestrians crossing. Instead of having to cross 2 lanes, they'll end up having to cross 3, and I believe that will make it a little bit trickier for them. What measures can we put in place to ensure the safety of the pedestrians?
Yeah, so I believe, we already have event signage in place. So when they have a tangi or a large event, there are flip down signs that can be used. I think the best long-term holistic solution would be the variable speed signage, which is the lit signage that comes up at certain times, which is what we had in place for the schools around the district. So we don't have that currently funded or planned. But I would see that as probably a final stage of the overall site safety. So the right turn bay is a key part of the traffic safety, and then the variable speed signage in the future would be that pedestrian safety as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hatfield.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just in terms of the, I don't want to give the impression that I don't take any notice of the speed limit, but can you tell me where the current speed restriction finishes before you turn right into Cameron's Eye? Is it past, is it beyond,
Yeah, so
it's beyond the right?
the 80k speed limit extends to, it's about 200 metres past the car park down Wars Road.
Right, yep, thank you. That sort of has got to be part of a short-term solution, does it?
It does, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Short, I'll hand it to you to move the recommendations.
Thank you. I'd like to move that the council receive the report on the planned right turn bay into the Aorangi Marae. 2, that the council note the funding allocation of up to $287,585 for new capital works from the existing unallocated roading budget to fund the construction of a right turn bay on Wars Road, which is within financial delegation of the Chief Executive. And 3, the council support the project, noting the road safety improvements, particularly to traffic turning right into Aorangi Marae, being option D.
Thank you. And Councillor Marsh, you were seconding that motion. Any further discussion? No. I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Look forward to seeing that one completed.
You have any guys?
Right, we're now on page 25, item 11.2. This is the draft waste management and minimisation plan deliberations. As you know, we received 93 submissions. We heard a few people spoke to their submissions, and today is about deliberating those and seeing if we're able to come to a conclusion with a recommendation. So welcome, Brittany.
Thank you. An exciting day. We've got a bit of work to do. So, Madam Chair, I was going to just talk through the salient points of the report, and then we can discuss the appendices when I've completed that and how you would like to go through those. Okay, so the purpose of this item today is to present to Council for consideration the results of public consultation on the draft Waste Management and Minimisation Plan 2022 to 2028, which I'll now refer to as the WIMP. And to recommend amendments to the WIMP that will be presented to Council for adoption planned for the 16th of June. So you'll see the recommendations that we've made, which we'll come back to once I've gone through the report. So moving down to the background section of the report in section 3. So the draft WIMP was adopted by Council for public consultation on the 7th of April, and we held the consultation period between the 8th of April and the 9th of May. Council received a total of 93 submissions. And there was a hearings held on the 19th at which you heard from 4 submitters. So you'll see in section 4 that there is a few graphs showing the general trend of feedback on the proposed new curbside initiatives. So you remember that curbside proposal 1 was a mobile garbage bin, wheelie bin collection service to fielding in the villages of Halcombe, Sanson, Himitangi Beach and Rongotia. So if you're a graph kind of person, these ones are quite useful. So the majority of people supported the provision of the curbside service to all of the proposed areas. And then you'll see the split with the other responses there. It's the same for the next graph in regards to curbside food waste. So the overall response was in support of provision to fielding in 4 villages. And then you'll see the split between other responses. And then the third is recycling curbside collection to the 4 villages. So overall, there was support for that. So of course, there was nuance in submission. So the section 4.5 of the report covers the 7 topics raised by submitters. So that covers strategic direction, the 3 proposed new curbside initiatives, the overall action plan within the WIMP. Some commented on existing levels of service in the solid waste activity, and then there were some general comments as well. So we'll talk about Appendix 1 to this report when we get to the end of this summary, and we can talk about how you wish to look through the suggested responses to each submission. So in the report in section 4.6, I've tried to give council a general vibe, basically, in a summarised way. So I'll briefly go through that now. So there was support for the council's vision of working to enable a circular economy for all waste stream. So basically, I supported that one. Goal 1 of council working in partnership with the community was supported. And many emphasise the importance of council actually working in partnership with the community. Goal 2 about practicing kaitiakitanga was supported and commended by the community. Many submitters encouraged council to be bold and take leadership in waste management and minimisation, and to lead the community towards greater wellbeing and a better future. So a theme of submissions on the strategic direction of council was for council to seek out and prioritise recycling opportunities within New Zealand and the Manawatū district where possible, and to avoid, minimise or cease sending recycling overseas. So the overall response for provision of the fortnightly mobile garbage bin service to Fielding and those 4 villages is supportive, like I said. There is some concern, though, that providing a NGB to residents will encourage greater waste production and cause less separation of recyclable and organic materials. However, on large, the submitters felt that the NGB service would be far more efficient and effective than the current blue bag collection. So although the majority of submitters were in support of a weekly curbside food waste collection service, there were a number of concerns from submitters who already minimise or reuse food waste at their place. So that is in the form of composting or worm farming. So some submitters' support of the service depended on the collection systems having consideration to rodent protection and the minimisation of odour. And some submitters wondered if the service should just be provided in Fielding, as they felt that maybe rural residents were more likely to deal with their food waste at home. There was some concern about the service being provided in Himitangi Beach due to the number of holiday makers. So that's something that came through with all the proposed curbside services, but we do have some ideas about how we could get around that, which we can talk about a bit later. And some submitters urge council to take leadership action and implement the service regardless of what feedback they get from the community. And this is due to the disturbing amount of food waste going into landfill currently. So largely, submitters were in support of the curbside recycling service to the 4 larger villages in the district. But many submitters were only supportive if council was not to remove the existing mobile recycling centres. So a lot of comments highlighted the convenience and efficiency of a curbside recycling service, and commented on some of the downfalls of mobile recycling centres, like how they get full, fly tipping and vandalism. There were some concerns about the cost of the proposed curbside recycling service, and then again the Himitangi Beach issue was raised. So some thoughts may have come to your mind during that, which we can cover when we talk about the Appendix 1, the responses to submissions. So we had some submitters and actually some councillors during the preparation of the WIM. I think it was Councillor Casey noted the success of PNCC's recent rollout of bin clips. So as officers, we completed a cost benefit analysis of the bin clip purchase and implementation, and we found actually it's really low cost and high benefit. So we have recommended to council, and you see this in the recommendations, that the bin clips be provided should the NGBs be decided on, the existing recycling bins in Fielding, and any new recycling bins rolled out. And so the provision of these bin clips to support council's curbside recycling service is eligible to be funded by waste levy funding. So you'll see in Appendix 2 in the waste levy funding plan that was fully funded the implementation of the clips to recycling bins. We'll talk about that later. We also recommend that the bin clips be provided should a NGB curbside collection service be implemented. However, this can't be supported by waste levy funding because it's not waste minimisation, it's waste management. So you'll remember there was a list of other actions in the WIM aside from the new curbside services. So on large, these actions receive support from submitters. Many suggested ways that council could better engage and educate the community on waste management and minimisation. And as officers in the infrastructure team, we're really excited to work with our communications team on ideas in that space. Some submitters suggested additional facilities or service that council could consider investing in the future. So you would have seen in the submissions that there were quite a few raised concerns with council's proposed action to partner with private waste industry to locate waste reduction facilities at council's resource recovery park. So this feedback related specifically to the location of the bioplant Manawatū NZ Limited's proposed waste to energy plant. So some felt that this partnership was not in alignment with council's goal for a circular economy. So during the consultation period as officers, we consulted with the Ministry for Environment, and they asked that we include specific waste levy funding amounts for each proposed action. So that is represented in Appendix 2, which we can go over together soon. We also note the reserves of waste levy funding that council currently hold, and there are a number of opportunities to significantly subsidise the implementation of curbside food waste collection and the extension of curbside recycling. And I also note to you that you need to include initiatives in your WIMP if you want to spend waste levy funding on them in the future. Of course, consultation on the WIMP is also a convenient time for council to consider feedback on existing levels of service. So you would have seen that flavour come through in the submissions, and some feedback about fly tipping, which you heard from one of the submitters who attended hearings. So just a reminder that that's dealt through the solid waste bylaw. There was some general feedback received, as I said. Also in Appendix 3 and 4 to the report are some minor amendments suggested to the WIMP to accommodate the end of the consultation period. And those are largely removal of references like please share your feedback, etc. So moving forward in the report down to section 6 in regards to community engagement. So we wanted to give you a flavour of what activities were undergone during consultation, so you can be assured that we have tried to canvass as much as the community as possible. So you'll see in 6.3 there are a number of comms activities were undertaken. And under 6.5, we felt it was useful to give you a general feel in those graphs for how many people that the Facebook ads and posts reach, because a lot of the focus of our consultation period was on online delivery due to COVID. That's a pretty good reach we've got there in terms of Facebook. In terms of operational implications and financial implications, although there are no implications associated with this report, should you adopt the WIMP, there will be operational expenditure and level of service changes, and these would be incorporated in Council's annual plan 23-24 and 10-year plan 2024 to 2034 as appropriate based on the timing of proposed implementation. And that's the same for the capital expenditure requirements. These will be included in the annual plan and 10-year plan. Moving into the conclusion, to summarise, the community are largely in support of the strategic direction of council for waste management and minimisation that was consulted on. The majority of submitters supported the introduction of all 3 new curbside services. So that's fortnightly NGB collection, weekly food waste collection, and curbside recycling collection to the 4 villages proposed. We are also recommending no changes to the action plan within the WIMP, aside from the addition of the bin clip implementation for the recycling bins and the NGBs, should those be adopted. So the recommendations that you make today from deliberations will inform the drafting of the final WIMP, and this will be brought to you at the council meeting of the 16th of June. So you have a list of 4 appendices there. So Appendix 1, we've gone through each submission point from the community and provided a suggested response to each. And so the way that's been written is assuming that you accept all of the recommendations within this report. Appendix 2 provides the amount of waste levy funding that we would spend on each of the initiatives, and we can talk through that together. And then we will likely not need to go specifically over Appendix 3 and 4 because of the minor nature of these changes, and also the waste levy spending plan has just been inserted into the back of the whip. So through you, Mayor Helen, how would you like to go through Appendix 1? Would you like me to go through each of them, or would you like to just hear from councillors if they have any issues or questions about the responses given?
I think let's do the second. We've had the opportunity to go through them, and so rather than go through each individually, let's open it up for questions or comments from the team. I've got one to start with. We did hear a number of submitters talk about the potential for the bioplant. In their view, that went against our circular economy vision. And I know that, having spoken to the infrastructure manager, that he gave a different view to that, which I think would be really good for us to include that into the replies. And maybe, Hamish, could you share that with us? We had submitters saying that that went against that circular economy, but you explained it very well.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll try and repeat that. So essentially, the concern around the sort of the take, make, and then dump it approach, which is the linear economy, is the perspective that the submitters come from, and it's trying to create the circular economy where effectively you're recycling, reusing everything. Now, there's some things which are very easy to do in that space. So things like your fibre, your plastic, your cardboards and glass, for example, and your plastics as well are a reusable, recyclable product. One of the things with plastic recycling is that through the chemical nature of the recycling process, it does actually degrade and break down over time. So whilst you have a recyclable component, once it's been sort of through the chemical process a number of times, the chemistry starts to break down. And so there's an increase in sort of virgin new product that goes in. So there's always going to be an element of that. But I think the key part with us, and I refer back to our submission that we made on the bioplant initiative. And if you remember back to that, and I forwarded around, I think, to all elected members, with the upside down pyramid, and you've got the reuse, recycle sort of circular components at the top of the pyramid, or the inverted pyramid, and that's where we really focus our energy. So that's what Brittany was outlining in terms of the recycling, the reuse, the repurpose. And the whole intention of the bioplant is that, as a concept, sorry, the pyrolysis technology as a technology that we'd look to use, is that it's only the stuff left over that would otherwise go to landfill. And so you're effectively reusing the leftovers as part of that circular process for heat generation, for diesel biodiesel production. So correct, that's not 100% fully sort of continuous recycling, if you like, but those products don't really have that opportunity there. It's either that or kind of landfill, because we've already looked at the higher levels of the waste hierarchy to take those recycle, reuse, repurpose components out. And so I think the perception of some of the submitters is that if bioplant or a pyrolysis operation comes in, that becomes our one-stop shop for everything. And all of a sudden we're turning what could be a reusable product into a one-use and then reburn it as biodiesel or the like. And that's not the case. That's only a very small part of the waste stream that we can't otherwise repurpose, reuse, recycle. And it is very much the alternative to what would be left over and trucked to landfill. So it does fit, and I guess we could probably debate this on a purist definition with the submitters around whether it is or not. But to be honest, it's the closest we're going to get to a fully circular economy for the entire waste stream. And I would also point out too that our reference to working with private industry, it's not just bioplant and it's not just pyrolysis. We're also working with companies that are doing construction and demolition waste recovery, which would otherwise go to landfill. We're working with biogas and eco-gas initiatives around anaerobic digestion of organic material. So again, that's recovery of organic material. So it's not just one company and one pyrolysis initiative. It's a whole suite of private industries who have got a whole range of technologies for that repurpose, recycle, recover, reuse. And so that's sort of where we were heading. And I think probably the timing with the bioplant resource consent application is probably where a number of submitters have sort of focused in on that particular, but it's very much one piece of a much bigger puzzle. So
Thank you. Yeah, well explained, and I think it would be really useful, even though the pyrolysis wasn't directly part of this plan, it was raised a number of times, and I think there's an opportunity there to explain what you just said in the replies to the submitters, rather than just as was suggested, we thank them, to actually explain that a bit more. You know, whether they support that view or not, but it's about sharing the information about why we've supported it. Thank you. Any other on any other feedback? Alice, Councillor Short.
Thank you. I think there should be some information about the proposed pyrolysis plant in there. I was actually really disappointed that Manawatū bioplant didn't put a submission in, because the purpose of the pyrolysis plant is to divert solid waste from landfill, and they still have not presented directly to us, and I would have thought that would have been the opportunity for that to happen. And my question to Hamish is, if they're not successful getting their consent from Horizons, then what will the plan look like?
Through you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I guess in terms of if they're not successful, I refer you back to the same explanation I've just outlined in terms of the inverted pyramid. We're still going to be working with other private entities. We're still going to be looking to maximise the diversion of waste from landfill, be it plastics, and there's a range of opportunities that we're working on there. The organic material, which is part of the food waste collection, which is a big part of the current waste services. At the moment, if the bioplant or the pyrolysis system didn't eventuate, or they couldn't gain consent for that, simply that part of the waste stream would at this stage continue to go to landfill until we found another way of trying to divert as much of that part of the waste stream from the landfill. But we're still already doing all the other things at the top of the waste hierarchy, so that doesn't change. And just one comment I would make too is that the reason we didn't specifically reference the bioplant or any of the other private entities in the waste management minimisation plan is because it was really around what we are doing in terms of predominantly a curbside collection service, and then a list of the other initiatives that we'll continue to work on. So we weren't consulting with the public in terms of do we go to landfill or do we go through a pyrolysis system. It was really looking at the waste assessment, and we identified that this organic material and kitchen food waste was a large proportion of what goes into the landfill system now. So that was an obvious first step to take that out. And then how can we enhance and incentivise that, plus also provide a wider range of curbside collection services to make it really easy for the public to not just put their dirty nappies in the recycling bin because it's cheap and it's easy, but if there's two bins sitting there and the nappy can go into the rubbish and the bottles can go into the recycling, we're making it really easy. And then having the fourth option with the food collection means that you've got somewhere between 20 and 40% of the waste stream can be taken out of what goes to landfill. So I think there was a number of components in there in terms of what we were actually consulting on and what was relevant to our waste minimisation plan. Bioplant had the option to if they wanted to make a submission, they could have done like anybody else did. For their own reasons, they chose not to. If my assumption on that would be that they're focused on the resource consent process for their activity. But secondly, our collection at the curbside is kind of secondary to their focus. They'd receive what comes in and then deal with it appropriately. How we collect it at the front end and what we do with it is largely our business, not their business. So they are distinctly different things, even though they are tied up in that wider sort of circular economy, waste management, waste diversion initiatives.
Thank you, Councillor Hedley.
Can I just ask a supplementary question to Hamish?
Yes, Councillor Shaw.
Yep.
So when will Manawatū bioplant be coming to talk to the council table?
Through your worship, at this point in time, we don't have anything formally lined up. However, if there's a willingness from elected members, I would suggest after they've got their resource consent and they're actually in a position to be able to proceed, I would extend an invitation, or Mayor Helen can extend an invitation, and I know that they'd be more than willing to attend. They've organised a number of public meetings which have been arranged either by them or by other groups who have a different perspective than the bioplant people. But they certainly wouldn't shy away from coming and speaking to council, either in a workshop format or in a public meeting, a public forum if need be. But I think it's appropriate to wait until they've got a consent as to whether there's anything to actually talk about, because until they get that consent, it's still a concept at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship, and look, I'd agree. I think the issue around the pyrolysis plant is actually a distraction to what we're discussing. And at the end of the day, just on the topic, the information that Bioplant would have provided to Horizons in search of a consent would have actually been no different to what they were going to put forward if they were to make a submission anyhow. And regardless, I think Mr. Ward is in an erudite manner expressly explained the perception around the hierarchy of actually where the bioplant fits in, and that the essential treatment of all other stuff is actually not at risk. The bioplant, should it be consented, is yet another tool and a waste minimisation strategy. It falls in after all of the other stuff that's concurrently been done. So anyhow, just on that. So there's a couple of issues that, or a couple of points that I just want to make and sort of kind of get clarified. So obviously, as an ex-resident of Mount Taylor, I fully support everybody having clips on their bins. As on a number of occasions up there, you could see not only the bins, but also the recycling at the end of Mallard Avenue piled up against the gate. And the wind was strong enough to actually pick up bins and shift them down the street. So that is actually something that I think should be done as soon as possible, quite frankly, for existing stuff. So I fully support that. Just in terms of the proposed mobile garbage bins, and I'm a little bit uncertain, at the moment we have two sizes of recycling bins, a larger one and a smaller one. Can you tell me what the larger size is? Is that a 240?
There's a 240 and a 120. Yep.
120
litres.
So my view would be that 240 as a garbage bin would actually be too big for a lot of people for a garbage bin, and that 120 would be more appropriate. Now, there's only two of us in our household, and a lot of households are. And, you know, a blue bag will last us 2-3 weeks at least. So it doesn't go out that often. And I'm thinking that a 240 bin as a standard bin may not be the best outcome. And I note that still, actually just getting back to the recycling again, in the villages, I think the points that have been made around the mobile recycling centres are very valid. And I imagine people like Councillor Short, who doesn't actually live in the village, but may well drop off recycling to the Halcombe Mobile Centre. And I actually think with the retention of those mobile centres on the villages would actually be of paramount importance. I note that if we're going to recycle bins to the villages, a harmonised rate would only see an increase of $5 per annum for Fielding residents. So I think that's $5 is bearable. And actually that the cost of the mobile garbage bin at an extra $30 a year over above the blue bag is also quite tenable in my view. However, I am struggling with the food waste collection at another $50. Now, you don't often see me wear a green tie or a green jacket, but we actually recycle at home. We don't put out food scraps. We compost. We have a worm farm, and we actually use it to grow vegetables, which is actually, strangely enough, not a very hard thing to do and actually quite sensible. So I'm struggling a little bit with the just my personal view. I could understand a food waste collection potentially in Fielding, but I think we have to accept also that not all members of our community are diligent when it comes to recycling, separating rubbish and recycling, and know that any campaign to change behaviour takes an awful long time. It's something that's not going to happen overnight. So I'm still struggling with the food. I understand the benefit of it. I'm struggling with the fact that we might have to pay another $50 a year. You can say $50 is $50, but $50 is $50. And actually, when you grow your own vegetables, $50 is actually an awful lot of stuff you produce in your garden. And so again, it's an issue we've got around a lot of people actually, end up paying for something that they don't actually use. However, I will balance that by saying a lot of people don't use the library and a lot of people don't use the swimming pool, but they still pay for it. And I understand that as well. But it was a fair point made by submitters, and it's one that currently still, I'm actually a little bit undecided on mobile food waste. But those are just sort of the main points that I picked up. But the other point I picked up on Facebook actually is, and I wondered, you mentioned that, Brittany, and I just wonder how effective bloody social media is, to be honest, because I looked at the engagement on the Facebook posts, only 17%, and on the Facebook ads, it was only 3.8%. And I do understand that most direct mail campaigns normally only have a success rate of around 4 to 7%. And I guess, we're sort of fitting in that, that area. It's not huge, but I guess it is what it is. And I think the way that we actually, it's a very difficult thing today to communicate with the community. That's just a point of observation. So that's my initial thoughts, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Could we respond to those?
Me and Hamish have been arguing about who gets to answer.
Brittany's desperate to respond, so I'll let her go first.
Okay, so the NGBs in terms of the size, I think that's something we want to look into more. So we've thought about the size and thought about the fortnightly collection, how many bags people generally use now, and try to think about that more. So that's not something we have to decide about today, which is good. So we can do some more research on the amount of sizes, and part of that would be asking other councils and stuff like that.
Would there be the potential for an option to ask?
Yeah,
yes.
And I think just on that point,
yeah.
When we introduced the 240 bin for commingled recycling, we also gave the option for the 120 bin at the time.
Yep.
And a number of the smaller users in the households of one occupant, they did opt for that. And so I think that would be part of the way we'd roll this out, and we have that flexibility. Yep.
Okay, so in regards to food waste collection, so something really important to remember is that government is likely to require this by the 2029 at the latest. So in my personal opinion, the sooner we get up and running, the better. Personal opinion.
Have you finished on that one?
No, one more thing. So when we went out with the community with $50 a year, that was assuming that it would be fully funded by rates. And we knew there would be a proportion of waste levy funding that could reduce that amount. So actually with some number crunching we've done, we know that actually now we could 100% fund the food waste collection bins, and that includes a kitchen caddy with waste levy funding. So there would be no capital rates impact for the service, only operational. And we can actually subsidise the operational at 50% with the waste levy funding. So it's going to be really good.
Will be a lot less than that, which has been a key focus of trying to make this work. The other thing I'll just add to that too is I think you're right, Councillor Hadfield, in terms of some households and families are very good and they do exactly what you've outlined, and I think probably the ones of us that live in the country probably do much the same.
Yep.
I guess the waste assessments and the waste data and the evidence that we've based this on says that most people don't do that. And so we know that between 20 and 40% of what goes to landfill now is in that organic sort of food waste space. So if the evidence showed that everyone was as good as that, we probably wouldn't need to bring it in, or it wouldn't be as effective to bring it in. Whereas everything that we've looked at locally, plus sort of what we're looking at nationally, there is still a large proportion of the waste stream that people are putting into their blue bags and their MGBs, and it's going off to landfill. And because we're focused on landfill diversion and waste minimisation, that is a key area that we can tackle with this one initiative. And as Brittany's outlined, if we can get the MFE waste levy money to fund the bulk of it, then it's a win-win all around.
Look, thanks for those responses, and I think that's actually put my mind much at ease. Thanks, Brittany. But having said that we shouldn't say anything about pyrolysis, I will, is that I do know that we end up with quite a bit of contaminated recycling, for instance, and contaminated loads end up going to landfill. And is that correct?
Two different issues, sort of.
Well, all I'm saying is that because, as I referred to it, those less diligent that do contaminate our, stuff that is caused to be diverted.
Yep.
There is another option which comes in at the bottom if you're having to actually divert stuff, good with bad, contamination.
That's quite
Just the
right.
point.
No, so there's two really relevant issues there. Sorry, Your Worship. One is at the moment people, like, I'll use the examples of the nappies because it's lazy, it's cheaper, it's whatever to put it into the recycling. So that's your contaminated bin at the curbside, which goes over our MRF, our sorting centre. And so all of that gets taken out before it goes into the recycling baler and stream. But that means that you've got a residual waste cost, which comes back to council, back to the ratepayer. So that the users and the generators of that waste are effectively skirting the system to use the council funded, sort of rates funded recycling bin. So that creates a headache for us to then have to pay for and transport and dispose of. So that, you're quite right, may go through the pyrolysis system, or it could be sorted and potentially recovered elsewhere. The second part of that would be, and you use glass as an example, if the people that take the glass, they have a very high spec for the contamination of, say, a load of clear glass. And those are the issues that, from a processing and a sort of a management point of view, we need to make sure that if it's contaminated because it's not a clean product, that's more a processing issue on our end to make sure that it's at the right standard and it can be then received. But you're right, worst case scenario is if it does get rejected and it's a plastics or a fibre paper, it can be directed through a pyrolysis initiative as opposed to being dumped at landfill in Auckland at extortionate price plus transport plus carbon emissions to get there as well.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, lots of good information to go on. I just wanted to bring up the issue, Hamish and Brittany, around fly tipping, and I'm not too sure how to word it really, but sort of looking for that reduction overall in fly tipping, and just wondering if there's any sort of eyes on this for the future. Because the way I see it is that just noting Councillor Hatfield's point just around the size of the bins. I mean, I guess I'd only put a garbage bin out if it was full, for example. And I think a 240 would probably allow that garbage to go in there as opposed to being on the road, or roadside or down the stream. Because we do deal with a large number of fly tipping events in the Manawatū.
I think, Councillor Casey, through Your Worship, fly tipping is whilst it's rubbish and it's solid waste, it's kind of a separate issue in terms of the customer behaviours. And what we typically hear is that I guess the excuse is that it costs too much to take it to the transfer station. So that's one element. And I guess we try and make things as cost effective as we can. We don't run our services to make a profit. So the cost is what it is. A large part of that cost is the transport to landfill and the disposal cost. And that was part of the thinking around the other initiatives of working with private companies, and Bioplant being one of them, is if we can reduce some of those costs, then we can pass some of those savings on to the community. And that would hopefully reduce the barrier there in terms of the cost that we get sort of quoted. Failing that, there's an element of the community that will probably always take their rubbish down to the river and drop it. And so that's more an enforcement issue through our bylaws, more so than the way that we offer and construct our solid waste services. But your point, I think, is quite valid. If we do have the larger bins, the 240s as an example, if the space is there, then there's really no excuse to go and tip it off the side of the river. But people's behaviour will be what it will be.
Thank you. Councillor Belsky.
Yeah, no, thank you for this report. Couple of things I agree with Grant on, many things. But coming down Kimbolton Road, Kimbolton Road this morning, there was bins out, wheelie bins and blue bags all sitting out there, and a lot of the blue bags were half full. And if you've got them putting their food waste into a bin and their other waste into the blue bag, you may lose money because they're not going to buy as many blue bags, because I think it's the food waste that they want to get rid of in the blue bag, because after 2 weeks it's not a good thing. But I think a 120 bin is perfect in my, because food needs to be put out quite regularly. And but yeah, if there's no cost to, as I understood it, there's no cost to the ratepayer to pick up the garbage. Is that right? The waste,
No.
The food waste?
No. Well,
It's a cost that we keep to a minimum through other methods of funding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the food waste we've said in the documentation would be collected weekly,
Yes,
and the general rubbish would move to fortnightly. So that would be to incentivise people to separate their food waste. And then you don't want it hanging around
Yeah,
in your
that's true.
property.
No,
So
that's
weekly is good, get rid of it because it stinks. Yeah.
And it recognises that if you are separating out your commingle, your glass and your food waste, you won't need a weekly rubbish collection service because it won't be smelly and.
that's what I'm getting at. You'll probably lose money in blue bags.
Well, the intention is to phase out the blue bags in
I
in
see.
town and
Right.
replace them with the bin. And so the bin will be provided and funded.
Instead of a blue bag.
Yeah, exactly. So the residents of Fielding wouldn't be buying their blue bags at the supermarket or wherever they buy them from. They'd have their rubbish bin NGB delivered at the start of the cycle.
Yep.
And that would be their waste service.
Yeah.
And so they don't need to buy anything else. That's covered
Yeah.
in their rates as part of the service that they're currently.
So I think it's a win-win in a way for the rate part. Yeah.
Thank you, councillor Campbell.
Thank you. Just want to explore the consultation a little bit. I think we've consulted pretty well on this, so well done. Gave everybody, good opportunity to submit, and a reasonable number of people did, and we had some good responses. Just regarding the villages, and probably it's proposal 3, I think. Just exploring a bit more the responses from the villages in terms of collections there. How do they compare to Fielding? Because the village is obviously quite different to Fielding. I was struggling to just work out if there was general support.
From the people that live in the village.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Because I know, we had good consultation we all did at the community committee meetings, and there was comments both ways. It was a bit of reservation, I suppose, from some people, but support from others. So it was a bit unclear for me what the general support was in those community committee meetings. So I'm just wondering what the summary responses would have been from the villages.
Yes, so through you, Mayor Helen. So there was that concern that I raised about the removal of the mobile recycling centres. So some said that they wouldn't support the curbside if we were going to remove the MRCs. So just raising to you all that our intention is not to remove the MRCs, because we'd probably see continued use, like's been mentioned, from people that actually don't live in the villages that come in to recycle. And we expect that the operating costs for those would reduce because less people would be using them. So yeah.
And it's important to note that was never part of that proposal to remove them. It was the addition of the curbside and existing service there. Yeah.
And then there was also comments about the pros and cons of MRCs and how the curbside service is a lot more convenient. And then there was the concern about Hamatangi, with people leaving bins out when they go home from their holiday houses, etc. So you're right that it was a bit mixed, and then there was that concern about the cost. And then also noting to you that the cost of the village recycling service would be subsidised by waste levy funding as well. And in the waste levy funding plan, we've actually fully subsidised the purchase of the bins with waste levy funding. Yeah.
Okay, so just to clarify that, based on the graph on page 29 here, in regards to curbside 3, the overall responses tended to be 2 to 1 in support of the proposals.
Yes.
Correct? That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Some of the points I was going to raise have just been covered, but I am concerned about affordability. I think we've got to be very mindful for the next year or two with the current economy that we're not landing too much extra expense on households. However, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable that whatever we decide, we'll have to go through the annual plan process. So there will be the opportunity to discuss further how we can fit it into our budget, possibly by making cost reductions in other places. Hamatangi was one of the ones I was concerned about. You've covered that. Can you just remind me, Brittany, the waste audit, did we do that within our own district, or did we get information from another council?
So for our waste assessment, we used assumptions made by other councils, And to make it easier for next time, because we want to be able to do it ourselves next time, we want to increase our data collection and make sure it's in a really organised way. So, you know, the dream is next time we do a waste assessment, it's just a matter of exporting the results, you know. So yes, we did use assumptions from other councils, and that was mostly PNCC, and then a farm waste collection study and the Hawke's Bay region. But for next time, we want to have our data in a way that we can have our own results.
But if I could add to that too, Councillor Shaw, it doesn't take away from the validity of what we'd expect to see in fielding as such. The behaviours of people that live in towns and cities and the various farms and farming types around the country. Statistically, you're close enough to make informed decisions around that data. Somebody who lives in fielding is not that different in terms of the households compared to Palmy or Martin or Cambridge or Ashburton. It's a industry accepted sort of metrics, if you like.
We also have the smart environmental data within the WIMP, which shows you the tonnes per year in the year 2020. So that's interesting to look at as well, and that's actual data.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you. A few points. I think it is important to have the choice of the 240 litre and the 120 litre, particularly for elderly people, disabled people, etc. I think a number would find the big one pretty difficult to handle, but everything else, particularly if it's full. Going to the point that Brittany answered, Councillor Hadfield well on, and to do with his concern about the $50, the food. And you said, well, be able to cover the capital cost of that and probably 50% of the operational. Can you give us some sort of ballpark as to where that might drop to? From the $50 that we were concerned about.
So yes, I'll just get a spreadsheet out.
The second part of that one, is it feasible? I probably know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, for an opt-out provision for composters?
Well, Brittany's finding her data. The reality is probably not. And the reason is that it's the same as the same principle of having a bin service for everyone as part of the rollout of replacing the blue bags. The economies of scale that come from delivering the service actually what make it affordable.
Yeah.
And so as part of putting this whole waste minimisation plan together, the team, despite you've got some diehard greenies like Brittany, and I'm probably a slightly green with a sort of corner, but the whole idea is that we know that we can't just charge people tons of money to do all these wonderful things. It's got to be economically viable and realistic to the household and to the ratepayer. And so all of the initiatives, including working with private industry around some of the things that we're trying to achieve, it's all about maintaining or reducing the cost and providing a better service. So we are very cognizant of that, and that is a key focus for us.
So you just take a lead from the government and say that there's an opt-out provision, and then cancel it down the track of that.
Noted. Councillor.
Okay, so I'm not the best mathematician, but I've got a spreadsheet here. So what I've done is I've taken out the associated cost of CapEx, because we'd be funding that through the waste levy, and I've kept everything else the same, except I need to take the interest cost out. Okay, so the cost per property with no 50% waste levy operational funding comes down to $39.75 per year. And if you're assuming 50% subsidy of the operating cost, it would be what, like $20?
$20, yeah.
That is dodgy math.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Amanda doesn't think.
My last question, excuse my ignorance, I've forgotten whether there is a mobile recycling centre at Hamatangi. Okay, that's probably good. Apart from looking after locals, I think it's actually really important to look after holiday makers who potentially could create more of a problem.
Yeah.
Yep. But they do as a rent batches at Wairere, and it's bloody awkward to know what to do with your rubbish when you leave.
And on that point, we have a long-standing sort of increased level of service at Hamatangi over the summer months.
Right.
And so the bottle the bottle collection service doubles or triples for a period of a month or so.
Wonder why.
And we've dealt with that over the years in terms of trying to marry up the servicing with the demand, but very aware of that. I think we've got a pretty good balance there now.
That sounds good. Thank you very much. I'm pretty comfortable.
Thank you, councillor Bowles.
Just a little footnote, down in Christchurch, they have a food garbage bin for separation, and they seem to know when they tip it out or look, they seem to know what residents aren't doing it properly, and they've got other wastes in it. Have we looked at any other towns that have got this operational, and is it working?
Yes, so there's a kind of a big interest trend thing going on in the solid waste sector about food waste collection. So we've been to webinars and stuff like that already, and everyone's talking to each other because we're all kind of in the same space. So we definitely want to learn off other councils. And there are councils, obviously, that have high tourist populations that we can learn off as well, that already have food waste collection. So yeah, there's lots of people to talk to.
Because the other thing, a letter come to my, a letter come to my son warning people, warning these residents that we're putting, that we're requiring.
There is quite smart technology which is out there and evolving, where you can have RFID or sort of readers on different bins, which is then registered when it gets tipped into the collection truck. So you can actually build a really good data set of where you're getting the best collection rates, which properties are and aren't putting their bins out. So that would be part of, I guess, a medium to longer term evolution of the service.
Yeah.
That you get a really good feel through, and that's some of that smart technology we look to import. And our contractor, Smart Environmental, no pun intended, are very much in that space as well. So.
Great, thank you, councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Worship. Excuse my ignorance, just trying to get my head around the funding side of it, because there's been 2 or 3 figures that have given to us verbally, and yet I'm looking at Appendix 2 at the bottom of the line there on our total waste levy spend. And then I'd have to go back and marry that up with what's in our actual annual plan, etc., from that point of view. So I'm looking at the difference in the costing, because here, your 2023-24 year, it's basically an extra 2% if that whole amount is applied to a rating scenario, and then 1% the year after. So I'm just trying to get my head around what the difference actually is. And
so Helen, it might be a good time to go through Appendix 2.
Thank you. Just the only other comment while we're talking about the responses to submissions, I noted there was a few around climate change. And I wondered, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I wondered if it's worth adding into the response the work that we're doing as part of the wider region in the climate action plan. So that regional work that we're doing, our own work we're doing, to add that into the response. Okay. Because we are doing, we're part of the regional work in that space as well as our own.
Yes. Okay, so we happy to go over Appendix 2 now?
Thank you. Any other comments in relation to Appendix 1 and the submissions? Councillor Quarry.
Thank you. The only, I'm quite keen on the idea. The only reservation I'd have would be in regard to Hamatangi. And me, do we have a handle on the number of holiday homes that are there? Because it seems like we're offering a service that really won't be fully utilised or utilised to any degree. And it just concerns me that, people will put bins out and they'll get left out, or they won't put them out or whatever. When you're at a place for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of the year, it seems excessive.
So I know the ratepayers, so there's 486 ratepayers. Yeah.
We don't know specifically how many
holiday homes.
We know that it's a popular holiday spot. But yeah, in terms of numbers of just holiday homes versus permanent residents or usually lived in, it's hard to say.
The number of permanent residents is lifting quite remarkably at the moment.
It's quite high.
And that would also, at a lesser extent, apply to Tangi.
Well, they're not putting a rubbish service up.
We're not looking to provide.
So, Mayor Helen, so in the responses to some of the concerns raised about Hamatangi, We've said that we'll really be doing some research on how we can make the services accessible to the holidaymakers as well. So that could be things like collection days and stuff like that. So, you know, something like, it probably wouldn't be the best idea, but a Saturday collection day. So there's ways that, and we want to learn off other tourist locations that have curbside services to see what they do.
Can we get an idea as to the number of homes that are holiday homes, whether it be an informal survey or a survey or whatever? But I think that would have some bearing on whether we provide the service or not.
The community committee themselves may have a reasonable
I
idea.
don't know if they know. They don't know themselves.
Yeah, we don't have any easy way of actually working those stats out.
Yeah.
Other than anecdotally, we know that there's
Hard to know.
We know that there's a lot of holiday homes there, but
Well, if it's sort of 40% or less that are permanent residents, you'd have to go, well, you know, is this viable?
Right, thank you. Let's move to Appendix 2.
Okay, so Appendix 2 shows the spend of waste levy funding. So it's not funding that you're going to have to recover through a rate. So you'll see in the first line there, the curbside MGB would not be able to be supplemented by waste levy funding because it's not a waste minimisation measure. And that includes including bin latches with those. The food waste collection, like I said, so in the next annual plan, we would be including 270,000 of a waste levy spend. So again, it would have no rates impact, and that's to purchase all of the bins required. So that's the curbside bin and the kitchen caddy. And then, like I said, 50% supplement of the operating cost. So that's the waste levy amount there, and that's 50% of the operating cost, planned operating cost. Yeah.
and it's worth noting, I mean, the whole point of the waste levy is taken at landfill as a tax, and it's then reinvested back into the economy to promote waste management, minimisation, and landfill diversion. So in theory, it should be a self-diminishing resource and eventually peter out to nothing. And that would be your utopian sort of circular economy and no landfills. I think we're a wee way from that yet, but this is how we intend to invest that money that comes back to us.
And so we also know that the waste levy has a planned increase currently quite significant. However, we've made really conservative estimates with our spending plan. So we've assumed that's only going to be $30 per tonne, when we know it's actually likely to go higher than that. The other thing as well is that there's going to be an increase in contestable funding available. So we may be able to, you know, apply for funding for some of these initiatives and have even more to spend.
We know that there's contestable funding coming, and we will apply for everything that we can.
Okay. Yeah.
We will try and get as much external funding in this space as we possibly can.
Yes. Okay, so in the next page, page 2 of the waste levy spend plan, there's money available to help implement a dedicated food waste collection at the Resource Recovery Centre. So that's will be good for areas that don't have access to the curbside food waste, and we'll be able to use the waste levy funding to subsidise the gate charge, so make it cheap for people so they're incentivised to separate. And then the next line, you'll see the curbside recycling service. The bin purchase costs would be fully paid for the waste levy funding, and then 50% of the operating costs would be able to be supplemented by the waste levy fund. The bin clips, which is the next line, so remember that if we were to provide new recycling bins to villages, we would roll out the clips with that. However, the existing curbside recycling bins in Fielding, we would have to do a rollout of the bin clips, which PNCC have recently done. We've learned from their costing and found that $37,000 of waste levy funding would purchase 100% of the bin clips for the recycling bin. And the remainder of the plan is general funding to support the actions. One thing worth mentioning is the application process for the allocation of waste levy funding to the community. So we have about $30,000 of existing funding to Parakore Enviro Schools and Zero Waste. So we would include that current funding as part of this wider pool to be available to the community. So that's a really good amount of 50K per year available for innovative ideas, education projects, programs, etc.
If you pick up the submissions that we heard, that was actually came through, particularly from Angela Baker, Sue, and the other woman who presented, Thelma.
Realness.
Yeah, they actually mention that in terms of how we can work with the community and those community groups, and so this would give some way of actually providing some seed funding for that. One thing they also mentioned too, which is relevant, they were quite focused on us having a dedicated waste management minimisation officer. So actually another FTE, that would be their job, is to do this. Now, we don't have another FTE in the budget as planned, but some of these initiatives, there's potential that an FTE could be potentially part funded or even mostly funded through some of these initiatives that are covered through the waste levy. So having them in here gives us, as Brittany said at the start of the presentation, the ability to invest that waste levy money into these initiatives. And if that looks like 2/3 of an FTE to focus on the partnering side of commercial with industry and getting out and talking to the farmers and working through commercial options with private providers, that's all part of that investment. And again, it's all focused on diversion from landfill, maximising the economies of scale that we would have in the wider resource recovery part, and therefore trying to reduce those costs as much as possible for the users and ratepayers.
So me, Helen, happy to take any questions on the waste levy spending plan.
Thank you, Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Just on the bin clubs, and I note that sitting not a hell of a lot in 23-24. I wonder if it wouldn't be prudent that if we can try and bring that forward for the residents of Mountain Views and Mount Taylor, and actually give them to them as quickly as we possibly can. I'm not quite sure how many residents there are of Mountain Views, but it's not a hell of a lot. And Mount Taylor's probably grown to capacity, but any idea how many households there are up there now?
We could look it up, but top of my head, no, but yeah.
So the reason we've included that for the next annual plan is we haven't put the spend in the current annual plan. So
I would have thought that for the 500 or 600 odd clips that we might need, that there would be a little bit of a slush fund somewhere that we could cover that sort of pretty much straight away.
No slush funds available. But to be honest,
I'm happy to rephrase that. Surplus funds in some area that may be applicable to actually, because it is actually an immediate problem for those areas.
Yeah.
Every time it blows, we get a mess.
And I think to be honest, even though it's unbudgeted in this year's annual plan coming, it's a small number and with an officer delegation, so we may be able to just make that happen, particularly if it's spending on waste levy without any rating impact. So
I think that would be thank you.
Worthwhile, yes. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Without getting into the machinations of operational matters, I'd probably support Councillor Hatfield's comments about the rollouts regards to the high wind areas first. That would be my comment, just to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Thanks, Brittany. So next.
so did you want to continue going through the waste levy spending plan or talk about the amendments to the WIMP in Appendix 3 and 4?
We probably do need to go through the amendments to check that which ones we approve of, so that those amendments can be made to go to the next council meeting.
Okay, so if you have Appendix 3 in front of you, that's the track change version. So the first change is on my page 4 of that, under it's an addition to a section called consultation process. So that section just describes the public consultation that was undertaken with the community on the plan. So is everyone happy with that?
Yes, makes sense.
Okay, so the next change is not until the sort of page 14 onwards. I've removed the great detail about the proposed new services and references to feedback desired. Instead, assuming all recommendations are approved today, I've put the new waste levy spending plan into the back of the plan, minor amendments to the wording above the action plan, and then that is basically all of the changes. So that waste levy spending plan we just looked at has been popped into the back of the WIMP.
And the reason Appendix 3 and 4 have been included is that the track changes version looks quite messy, but we thought it was important so you could see what's out. But Appendix 4 gives you what would be the final waste minimisation plan that we'd look to bring back and adopt at the 16th.
So any disagreement with what's proposed there? That makes sense. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not a disagreement, just clarification, please, just on your table 3 and table 4 around your estimated waste, both rural and domestic, just the tonnages thereof. They're not our tonnages, are they? They're a global estimate.
So of the district, so they're not the tonnages that council collects and sells, but we were required to estimate what our district is generating.
Yeah, but the figures that you've used is not an estimation of our district, it's an estimation taken from a national statistic, is it not?
From PNC, so there's differing assumptions that have been made. So the urban has been taken from a PNCC waste assessment, and we've calculated pro rata based on our population.
So where I'm going with that, in your comment before about smart environment, some of the things that they're looking at, when can we then start to generate our own calculations that are more accurate than these?
Well, we could invest in our own waste assessment, which we decided not to because of the metric. The numbers here are effectively close enough. I think the investment and the time to get our own numbers to tell us largely the same thing, I don't think there's value in that. But as we go forward in the service, that's where we'll be collecting annualized data on everything. And so over the short, medium and longer term, we'll be building that picture, if you like. And so when we reconsult on this in 6 years' time or 5 years' time or whenever, we'll have all of our actual data to be using, because we'll have a lot better handle on it locally.
And the other thing, Councillor March, is in the next 10-year plan, council will be required to review its measure and targets for the solid waste activity. So you'll probably find yourself wanting to align those with this one.
Yep.
And we need a way to measure success on each of so we need to ensure our data is lining up so we can see how successful we're being. Yeah.
And it's probably that forward-thinking thing that generates the question, in my point of view, that if central government's going to go down the track that they seem to be going down, then we actually need some comprehensive data for our district to fight their decision.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell.
Your Worship, just from the discussion we've had around the table here, and the results of the community consultation, I think I can't hear any significant objections to any of the proposals that we've got in front of us, accepting that we, we'll have time to refine them as required through the, next LTP and, the next review when that comes up. But I'm generally in support of the recommendations we've got here. And, so we could debate this all day, I suppose, but I'm suggesting perhaps we put them to the vote.
Thank you. So I guess just to wrap up the how we've been going through that, is there anything else in the appendices that anyone wants to raise? Otherwise, we'll take the recommended changes on board. Great, thank you. So Councillor Campbell, Dr. Moon for the recommendation. Page 25.
Are we doing them?
Would you like to do them individually?
I think let's do them individually.
All right. Well, I'd move then that one, the implementation of a mobile garbage bin refuse fortnightly collection service, including provision of bin clips to field and curbside refuse customers and to the villages of Rongatia, Sanson, Halcombe, and Matangi Beach in year 1 of the 10-year plan 2024 to 2034 be included within the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan 2022 to 2028 for adoption.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for, yes, Councillor Casey for recommendation 1? Any further comment, discussion on that one? Otherwise, Councillor Shaw.
What do we decide about Hamilton? Because we were still debating whether there's going to be enough permanent households there make that fair and equitable. I just wondered whether perhaps do we make a new bullet point down the bottom, further investigation into how many permanent households there are at Hamatangi?
Possibly, Your Worship. I think the results of the consultation, I understand, were generally in support from Hamatangi. So possibly I wouldn't exclude that at this stage. What your thoughts are?
Through you, Worship, I think the recommendation as put there is sound. And I think that reflects the general mood of the discussion and the feedback we've had. So
I think the other thing is the recommendation is to take effect from 2024. That does give us some time to be able to perhaps tease out that a bit better. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is signalling our intention.
Yeah.
And then if any new information comes up. Thank you. Any further comments to that? Otherwise, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Carry on.
Councillor Campbell.
Number two.
No, stop. You're on the right.
Your Worship, sorry to interrupt. I'm so sorry. Can I have it recorded that I voted in favour of the motion? I had an internet unstable period there, so when I came back online, you guys had voted. So.
Oh, okay. Yes, I did note that you hadn't seen a hand either way.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Right.
All right, we're on number two. That the implementation of a curbside food waste weekly collection service to Fielding curbside refuse customers and to the villages of Rongatia, Sanson and Halcombe, Matangi Beach in year 1 of the 10-year plan 2024 to 2034 be included within the waste management and minimisation plan 2022 to 2028 for adoption.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that recommendation, please? Councillor Belsky, any further discussion? No, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Recommendation 3.
I'll do that one too. That the implementation of a curbside recycling collection service, including the provision of bin clips to the villages of Rongatia, Sanson, Halcombe and Matangi Beach in year 1 of the 10-year plan 2024 to 2034 be included within the waste management and minimisation plan 2022 to 2028 for adoption.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Hadfield, any discussion? Councillor Marsh?
I'm just struggling to, what's the difference between 3 and 1 other than Fielding?
One is a mobile garbage bin, so for rubbish, and 3 is for curbside recycling collection, and it's only to the 4 villages proposed.
Okay.
Thank you. So we have that moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Recommendation 4.
I'll carry on. That the provision of bin clips to support existing curbside recycling services and Fielding be added to the action plan for the waste minimisation and minimisation plan 2022 to 2028 to be implemented in the 2023 to 2024 financial year.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Marsh.
Just again, a clarification. Why have we got that when 1 and 3 already includes the bin clips?
Because number 3 is new recycling bins to the villages, and it will include the bin clips. But number 4 is to existing recycling bins in Fielding.
And then I'm happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Quarry.
Can we move quickly in regard to what Councillor Hadfield had to say with regard to the delivery?
We'll amend, yeah. Yes.
We'll do that anyway.
Super.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Motion is carried. Recommendation 5.
That the proposed waste levy spending plan be included within the waste management and minimisation plan 2022 to 2028 for adoption.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Ford. Thank you. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Motion is carried. Recommendation 6.
That the proposed post-consultation amendments to the draft waste management and minimisation plan 2022 to 2028 be included in the document for adoption.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Hadfield. Thank you. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Raise your hands. Against. Motion is carried. So you're suggesting that we don't need an additional recommendation to do the existing.
We will amend the timeframe in the final draft, which comes back to council for adoption.
Council on the 6th.
And then we'll make it happen in the background.
Excellent, thank you. So those recommendations are all carried. So that's great. That's really good signal to our community, the direction that we're taking in our waste management. So thank you, Brittany, you and your team.
No, yes,
well
thanks
done.
to the team. They're all on there.
Yeah,
So
well done, team. Thank you for the work and also the way you've put it out into the reports, the graphs, the consolidation of all of the information in the submissions. Thank you very much. Made it very easy to follow.
If I could, Your Worship, just to endorse that, Brittany has done a huge amount of work to bring this together, and I'd like to acknowledge that as well because it is a fantastic piece of work. Thank you.
thank you. See you at adoption.
Thank you. Right, let's take a break for morning tea. So I adjourn our meeting. Let's take the 20 past, be back here, please. to go. Right, so we'll resume our meeting and we are up to item 11.3 on page 35. This is the adoption of the capital contribution policy, and the purpose is for us to look at the draft policy and consider that for adoption. So welcome, Amanda.
This was supposed to be myself and Hamish, and we were going to decide who took the lead, but since he's not here, it's me.
We'll keep it hard questions for Hamish.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the draft policy for capital contributions, just a little refresher. In reality, it's for areas outside of the DC area, so it can be a bit confusing. I remember showing you kind of a picture of what the DC map looked like, and if it's outside of the DCs, you're now taking a capital contribution. So you will not pay both. A person will not pay both the DC and the capital contributions, one or the other. We've talked previously about how the capital contribution is calculated. So it's the value of the scheme divided by the number of available units in it. So it's divided up. That makes it quite difficult for some of the smaller schemes, can make it quite expensive. So previously we kind of had a discussion around that and thought that the standardisation of the fees across the activities gives a little bit more palatable for those connecting in. Because your smaller schemes would be much more expensive. So we've looked at the standardising. With regard to the standardising, there's a couple of schemes that we excluded from that specifically. Stanway Halcombe, Kiwatia, Tamatangi, not standardised. They're outside of this. What's that? Waitangi West. Yeah, I'm kind of, it's not a lot to the policy. So Hamish is happy to take questions.
And we have to workshop previously.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Correct. Okay, so let's open it for questions, comments. My question really, Kiwatika and Bolton water scheme, is that part of the Waituna West?
No.
Where does all that fit in?
So Kiwatia
Kiwatia's, yeah.
it's an interesting one because it's been run by a separate committee, if you like, separate from council. So council leases the water scheme to a trust which they administer. It's probably an odd one in terms of how our other water schemes are set up. And if you use the Stanley Halcombe water scheme as an example, there's a committee of scheme users and they work closely with council. We do the maintenance and we handle all the compliance side of it, whereas Kiwatia is so a bit of history in that one. Shane's well across as well.
There's a lot of history. The scheme, I won't get into, but yeah, it's as Hamish says, council's asset sits on the asset register. We lease the asset to the trust, and the trust runs the scheme. We rate for the users, and then we pass that rate on to the trust.
Thank you. And just as an aside, with the way the proposal's going for under 3 waters reform for rural water schemes, that is something we may have to look at again.
Yes.
Some of the direction that they're talking about going.
Who knows?
Yeah, exactly, but it's, yeah, just it's worth noting.
I do know that, you know, there in that latest report, I still think that's very vague. And referenced in the local government act and provisions that already exist in there, but Kiwatia does not fall on those provisions.
I was thinking more of the other schemes that council owns and manages, the communities asking to take them over so they become private. Yeah. Okay, anyway, that's a different discussion. Councillor Enfield.
Yeah, just in terms of on page 40, I was looking at a simplistic example because I think they're the best sort of example. Got my advocacy out, but just in terms of where it says by way of capital contribution or a target rate to pay the principal portion of a loan for capital works, where does the interest fall on the loan? Does that?
The interest comes through your rates.
Right.
So, yeah, that's your rates,
So that-
part of your operational cost.
So that's almost part of the level of the rate, the interest becomes a part of the level of service charge.
Yes.
Your targeted rate includes the likes of your interest, your depreciation, and all of your operational running costs.
Thank you.
chemicals and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Casey?
Yeah, thank you. Just on the, maybe on the back of your comment before, your worship, in regards to Three Waters, and it may be distracting from this conversation, but how does Three Waters proposal affect capital contributions moving forward? You know, I guess we don't know. There's a whole lot of unknowns here. We don't know how much it's going to cost to actually connect to the new Three Waters network. I might even be answering my own question here. Amanda or Hamish, are you able to provide any commentary, or is it still early days through the Chief Executive?
Through your worship. My take on it, Councillor Casey, is that any existing policies and fee structures and charging that we have will be taken into a new entity. I would expect that they'll probably run them as they are for the first year or two, or maybe three, with a view to moving towards some sort of a standardised connection charge and service charge. So what we see as a capital contribution and a targeted rate, I can see that being a standardised capital contribution and service charge across the whole entity. But there's a lot of water to go under that bridge before they get to that point in terms of the establishment of those entities and then the operation and running of them.
Yeah, can I just also just very briefly add, if that's okay, your worship, just in regards to a couple of days I've had on in conference in regards to government policies and rollouts for local government, I strongly suspect that they probably even haven't thought of that component yet, Hamish. So just a heads up really for, yeah, judging from the consultants and lawyers' comments on the day on a raft of topics, just probably more of a heads up for our council to be aware of that and trying to anticipate where the ball's going to land. A whole raft of works, including the Three Waters connections.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and just on the back of Councillor Casey's comments, I would bring back to the table, if we can, a conversation around the point that I've made on 2 or 3 different occasions around starting to actually split out our rates from a Manawatū District Council initiated rate and a central government initiated rate. And if we can start to preempt that, so that when some of these hit the table, which they are going to do, we can actually show our public just what is being instigated by central government, not necessarily by actions around this table. And that's a big discussion that we need to have, but I'm just thinking, can we preempt
what
that?
rate that would apply to?
No, I know, but it's at some stage, Hamish's comment there.
Conversation for the rate review process.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments on this report? No. Otherwise, we do have a recommendation on page 35. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Ford.
Your Worship, I move that the council adopt the draft capital contributions policy as outlined in Appendix 1 of this report.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? For that, Councillor Hadfield. Thank you. Any further discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, I'd probably like to highlight the amount of work that Amanda's put into this. It's bounced around council for a while now, and it's been grabbed and sorted, and Amanda's the key driver behind that. So.
Yeah, it is. It's great to be able to tidy that up and get it lined up correctly. So we are now on page 46. This is the adoption of district planning, environmental health, capital contribution and development contribution for charges. So Amanda, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just opening this report. The 2 parts that I'm mostly involved in is capital contribution, development contribution side of it. The district planning stuff, Ellie is kind of leading the process, so she may need to pipe up with any questions around process in there. During the annual plan process and with the adoption of the annual plan, you adopted the main bulk of these fees and charges. These ones were put to one side because there is a specific process around the district planning and environmental health ones that needed to be followed around consulting, yeah. And then the development contributions and capital contributions, I wanted us to confirm the policy before you adopted the fee. And it's in the two development contributions and capital contributions are quite similar, so I felt they should come together to be adopted. So that's why these ones are a little bit later than the others. The district planning and environmental health fees really haven't changed much at all. We're only talking about mostly inflation, I think it was. Is that right, Al? Yeah, mostly inflation. So nothing too much in there. And just a reminder, because I've just said it a few minutes ago, about capital contributions are based on the formula value of the scheme divided by the available units. Development contributions are based on your 10-year plan budget of what you're actually doing for your growth works, divided by the number of growth expected properties, there's another term for it, and then divided up by those. So it's actually a calculation behind that DC fee based on your spend and based on inflation and interest rates. Yeah, that's probably all I've really got to say. I mean, I don't think any of these fees are new to you. Yeah, happy to take questions.
Thank you. Ellie, is there anything you wanted to highlight in the district planning and environmental health activity?
Only just to note that we received no submissions on those fees.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Page 62, the development contributions, because there's such a passage of time between workshops and adoption and so on, I'm afraid I've just forgotten, but why don't we have the proposed discount
Sure.
for fielding infill and also for community housing?
Yeah, sure. So that was a policy. So the DC policy that we're currently operating under is the existing policy. During the LTP process, we went out for consultation on the new policy, which also included the option of a remission and also included a new section compared to our existing policy around infill. That policy was not adopted during the LTP process. More work needed to be done, and due to changes of staff and other things, it hasn't actually been completed yet. So that is, once we've got through the capital contribution, tick that off, we're now going to the DCs to pick that policy back up. So when we pick up that policy, if we do go down the path of deciding that you will do infill or you will do remissions, we will need to come back and subsequently adopt new fees or additional fees and charges for that new pricing. But at the moment, these fees are all set on the existing policy.
So if I may, what sort of time? It's just that there are a number of people wanting to know, as we speak.
Sure.
And are we talking weeks, months, decades?
I'm probably thinking more like 6 to 8 within the next 2 months, because it's been picked up and put down a couple of times. It's gone through legal review. The new executive kind of get our heads back into it, pick it back up. We'll probably need to come back and talk to you about it, bring you up to speed, and then we'll bring it back to council for decision.
As a guide, a couple of months.
There is a bit of work to do in that intensification space, something that wasn't really looked at in great detail previously, and that was the impact on the storm network if we intensify the area that is being proposed, which is basically south east streets. Yes. And Hamish's team is working on that now, I believe. So, and if you recall those December events prior to Christmas, highlighted that you'll be a bit careful about how much more loading we put on a fielding network. So we'll do that where we don't want unintended consequences thinking here out of what is intended to be a good outcome by intensification and lower DCs, but ends up with us costing a hell of a lot more money in installing infrastructure.
The other one in relation to community housing, that wouldn't be as applicable, would it?
No, it's all part of it. It's all
okay. If we're talking a couple of months, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Page 60, I did have a bit of a conversation by email with Amanda, and I didn't get round to emailing Hamish. Himitangi Beach, we're now proposing a new dwelling capital contribution fee for wastewater and an existing dwelling, and I was explained that that was because the contractor quotes those two prices. I just thought we've standardised everything else, and that one used to be standardised. Why are we now dividing that one out? I do appreciate there's a difference in cost, but because we've standardised everything else, and you can't say any other connection costs exactly the same, even if council does it. I just wondered what the thinking was behind that.
Thanks, Alison. The key thing with that one is that we have a external supplier. It's not just a connection in terms of a service connection. There's on-site pump chambers and connections and dealing with multiple property owners and potentially power supply issues there as well. So we've always had a maintenance supply agreement since the scheme was put in place. And the pricing that we've got in there reflects the actual costs. There's no margin in there for council. It's just the cost is what it is. And I've worked through the cost of a greenfield site versus the cost of a brownfield site. It's just easier for them for one as opposed to the other. And so if you look at the way that the cost is put together by way of a capital contribution, you've got the same network access charged, which is now harmonised across all, plus the actual physical connection costs, which are directly passed on through the contractor. And that's why we've made that specific exception to that, because there's an actual cost for council to incur.
Yeah, we've standardised everything else, and this one just sort of sticks out like a sore thumb. It's different to everything else. I understand the background, but I wondered if it was fair and equitable.
So I'm just picking up what Hamish said. I didn't stress that enough. Is that we have standardised the access to the network price for Himitangi, so they are the same price. It's just that when you're connecting in Himitangi, you also have to have your pump chamber, and that's the difference. But the actual price itself to connect is standardised. It's just that additional cost is what makes the difference.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? No? Otherwise, we can go back to the recommendations on page 46. If I can have a mover and a seconder, please.
Also move. Motion is read.
Thank you, seconder. Councillor Casey, thank you. Or did you have a question, a comment? No. So those recommendations have been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I'll put the motions. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Motions are carried. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. Right, we turn now to item 11.5. We're on page 63. This is the Local Government New Zealand membership. You will recall that normally this is an expenditure of council that goes via the Chief Executive. Given the experience that we've had on the Three Waters reform discussion and what has happened historically with LGNZ signing the agreement with the government, which limits their ability to advocate for all of the views of their members, which created the need for communities for local democracy to be set up, of which our council is a member. It has raised the need for this to come to council for a council decision around the future membership for the organisation. We've discussed it many times, the frustrations that we've had, but that's been particularly around the Three Waters reform. But this is an opportunity to not only consider that, but also the value and potential support that LGNZ provides for councils overall, over all of the topics. So I'll hand it over to our CE Shane. The report is there. Is there anything that you wanted to highlight in there?
No, I just wish you've covered all of the things. I know there's a conversation that we had, but I just, to me, it's even said, so I just let the councillors make what they want to do.
Thank you. And just, this is a similar debate that's being had around the country at the moment. And LGNZ has been made aware of the concerns of a number of their council members. So let's open it for discussion. Councillor Hedrick.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And bear with me, colleagues. On the 11th of October last year, I wrote to the Chief Executive to table a notice of motion at the 21st of October council meeting in accordance with Standing Orders Clause 27.1, the council to withdraw from membership of Local Government New Zealand. That motion was voted down by a majority of elected members, but as recorded in the minutes of that meeting after a division was called for, was not unanimous. Subsequent motion by Councillor Campbell that the Manawatū District Council has no confidence in Local Government New Zealand's leadership and actions regarding the Three Waters reform was, however, passed. And I still hold that view of no confidence. In recapping the reasons for my notice of motion, I noted that our community had overwhelmingly rejected the proposals of the Three Water reforms, as our council did what many did not do, and that was to ask the community for feedback directly. This certainly was not a preferred option of the government, who deemed it unnecessary and basically advised accordingly. Local Government New Zealand, to my understanding, did not champion councils to seek the views of the communities around the country or challenge the government on this issue. Many elected members from across New Zealand have stated that Local Government New Zealand has become a mouthpiece for the Department of Internal Affairs on Three Waters, not only Three Waters, but other reforms. Other prominent submitters stated that LGNZ has been used as a pawn by the Crown to progress a proposal that offers one form of resolution and one form only for the perceived water problems of the nation. I also noted that as a council, we not only owed it to our community to show that we heard and share their concerns, especially given the large number that provided feedback and who overwhelmingly opposed the reforms, but we were also committed to fight for the principles and integrity of democracy and representing their views on the disingenuous and deceitful proposal from central government that would essentially result in the theft of significant assets paid for by ratepayers past and present. And LGNZ seemingly went along with us. That's a fail for me. LGNZ had signed a heads of agreement with the Crown without consulting its member councils. And at the time, I wished council to discuss and debate in public forum the lack of performance and leadership of LGNZ, which in my view is suboptimal. In signing that agreement, LGNZ on its own cognizance in effect committed or supporting the case for change, supporting the Crown's preferred approach to reform had been tested through design process and expressed the view that the proposed model design and approach to reform is sound, endorsed the Three Waters reform financial package, and if the government decided to adopt an all-in legislated approach, LGNZ would accept the all-in participation as needed to realise the national interest and not actively oppose such approach. Had acknowledged that the proposed financial support package is fair and reasonable and a governance and ownership structure that's convoluted. By these actions, LGNZ had effectively disqualified itself from representing our council's point of view, a considerable fail. On April the 1st this year, LGN President emailed elected members details of a new strategy for LGNZ that states, our new purpose is to be local democracy's voice, vision and voice. We will ensure that local democracy and local voice is at the front and centre of all our work. Our representative body, who on our behalf purport to champion localism, have demonstrably failed to advocate on behalf of our community. That's another fail. On localism, it's my view that LGNZ talks the talk but does not walk the walk, evidenced by their capitulation to government manipulation. Centralisation is not the panacea for all problems, and a good example of this is the centralisation of New Zealand's polytech sector, which has seen 139 bureaucrats added and a $48 million problem balloon to well north of $100 million. Centralisation at its best. This strategy also includes 4 new leadership pillars to guide LGNZ. One of those is to advocate, to champion and influence central government and our communities on behalf of the national interests of local government with credibility and authority. In my view, they've failed to act with credibility and authority. certainly not the authority of the 31 councils who have joined Communities for Local Democracy, to at least have an avenue to advocate on behalf of those communities whom local government New Zealand have recklessly and blatantly disregarded. Yet another fail. Furthermore, LGNZ have stated that connecting with councils is a critical part of their work and that they fight for the right of communities to choose how they live and to have their voices heard. Well, that's hardly been evidenced on how they've approached Three Waters reforms, decide then consult, hardly a recipe for success. An explanation given that it is better to be inside the tent than outside is, in my view, a rather puerile attempt, I think, to defend the indefensible. It's a tent with no roof and no walls. It's a fail. As a council, we sit in the provincial sector in Zone 3 within Local Government New Zealand. Our provincial representative, the Mayor of Wanganui, has willfully and knowingly failed to represent any view other than what I believe is blind ideological faith in support of government proposals, clearly evidenced by his public support for the Labour Party and indeed acknowledged by the Prime Minister. Our Zone 3 representative, the Mayor of Ruapehu, has acted in what he considers to be the best interest of the Ruapehu district, and not all his councillors share that view, and other districts that perceive they have no way of being able to afford to invest in their Three Waters infrastructure. Neither attempted to contact provincial sector or Zone 3 member councils at that time. Our provincial and Zone 3 representatives have not only failed our community, but have also had the temerity to criticise and remonstrate with the leaders of Communities for Local Democracy, who have had to do what they were elected to do, but failed. Another fail. And a good example of this ideological behaviour is outlined in the recent article by Hutt City Councillor Chris Milne, titled The Tale of Two Cities, which identifies that a mayor elected on the Labour ticket has put allegiance to the Labour Party ahead of the interest and wishes of the community. And I recommend colleagues that you read that article. This really makes a mockery of the oath elected members take to represent their communities without prejudice. Winston Churchill once said, success is often described as going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. And I believe this quote has relevance in this debate, and as much as the areas that I've identified where Local Government New Zealand has failed. Unsurprisingly, I also lack confidence that local government can, in a representative manner, effectively represent the principles and integrity of democracy, which in my opinion face further threat from other areas of government reform. And some of those are controversial for many communities. And they should, I believe, reflect the following. In a democracy, every citizen has one equal vote. And look at the Rotorua debacle. In a democracy, everyone has equal rights and opportunities regardless of race, religion and colour. In a democracy, people are elected, not appointed. Whilst I've laboured somewhat on the issues around Three Water reforms, I must point out the significance of the lack of representation offered on what has far-reaching impacts, not only for our community, but many others that have continued, to invest in infrastructure. The 90 billion odd collectively accounted for in territorial local authority 10-year plans shows planned future investment that many experts say is a more accurate figure of what is required than the amount of projected investment government sources indicated. What we've seen from Local Government New Zealand is appointment of government supporting ideologues on working groups and a failure to take responsibility to undertake the core function of council representation across the sector and fairly represent all views. And to quote Voltaire, he once said, no snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. Sums it up for me. I've come to the sad conclusion that Local Government New Zealand is like a wasp in a beehive. Bees are useful, a wasp is not. On that basis, Your Worship, my support is for recommendation 2. However, in stating that, and in the event that my colleagues' indications on the debate of this issue indicate majority of support for an alternative recommendation, I would reluctantly support a recommendation should one emanate that at least recovers council's fee to Communities for Local Democracy, plus other associated and real costs incurred by our council. And those are the costs of funding an alternative but necessary course of advocacy. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, colleagues.
Encore. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Hadfield. Let's open it up for further comments, discussion. Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Hadfield. I can see that you've obviously put a lot of work into that, and congratulate you on that. I agree with everything you've said. their LGNZ's representation of Manawatū District Council's view and interests in respect to Three Waters reform has been a total fail. However, at this stage in the debate, I think it's worth adding in another couple of points for consideration. Local Government New Zealand do cover more than Three Waters. And I have participated in many valuable conferences, seminars, meetings, webinars, training programs, etc. And I have to say some that weren't so valuable as well, in my opinion. But however, credit where credit's due. And secondly, having an organisation to represent local government's views and interests to central government is very valuable. And by resigning or not renewing our membership, we would weaken the credibility of our sector in the eyes of government. And I think that's quite an important consideration. So for the above two reasons, I would like to put another option on the table. And the process is not really my thing, but the gist of it is that I would want to move that put another option on the table, that the Manawatū District Council renews its membership with Local Government New Zealand, however, reduces the amount of the subscription paid by $17,250, which is $15,000 plus GST, because we're dealing here in inclusive of GST figures. So from 44,943 and 18 cents GST inclusive, as in the recommendation 1, to $27,693.18 inclusive of GST, being $15,000 plus GST that MDC has paid to join Communities for Local Democracy in order to have an organisation to represent Manawatū District Council's views and advocate to government on MDC's behalf. I'll just note that in doing so, I realise that if we proceed with my recommendation, that Local Government New Zealand would then have to make a decision as to whether to accept our lower fee and antagonise members who've paid the full membership fee, or to kick MBC out of Local Government New Zealand. I do note that if the latter happens, that we could join at any time we wished. We could rejoin by the payment of the membership fee. There is no application process to join again. We just have to pay the money. So if we changed our minds down the track, or for whatever reason, we could get back in whatever we wanted to. So I think the risk is worth taking. But yeah, I guess my proposal is a compromise.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Given the comments of the two prior speakers and agreement in part to some of it, to both of them, I think we should actually table this paper, because I don't think enough work is being done on it, because with two speakers today, we've already come up with two further recommendations to give us the full effect of that. Also, given Councillor Hadfield's well-prepared speech, it would seem to me that if we actually pulled away from the membership, are we doing this on a permanent basis, or are we doing it on a time frame basis? And that needs to be clarified in my mind as far as that is concerned. Having said that, from a recommendation point of view as to today, I am in favour of option 1, and the fact that we remain within LGNZ, because I see that they do a huge amount of good right across the councils, and have done in the past and will do in the future. It's no different in my mind as to when I was farming and having membership of Federated Farmers. I certainly did not agree with some of the things that Federated Farmers did, but they were our voice to take through to the next stage as far as any remits and those sorts of things are concerned. So to me, I don't think that reducing a fee would work. And certainly I don't think, or put it another way, I think we would leave ourselves vulnerable if we actually retracted from membership. So there's a couple of questions in there. I think we should table it today and come back with further information so that we can make a more informed decision around that.
Okay, so a couple of points there. You're saying that you potentially heard two different amendments potentially that
Yep.
could be considered. I didn't hear that.
Your worship, I have stated that my preferred option is recommendation 2. However, I did say that I would be prepared to entertain, should another elected member put forward an alternative recommendation that recovered the costs of communities for local development, that I may find it in my best interest to actually support that, given that I may not, that recommendation 2 may not have sufficient support from elected members.
Thank you.
So even
Clarification.
as a reply to that, just given that comment in regard, we actually moved our membership to C4LD prior to actually having any discussion about pulling away from LGNZ. So our decision was actually made prior to that, that we were investing an extra $24,000 on top of our LGNZ membership.
Where are you getting these things from? There's no $24,000.
Or whatever we've spent on LGN on.
And there's no 2 extra
communities.
recommendations.
The membership we paid for Communities for Local Democracy was moved through the council prior to any discussion of taking away our membership to LGNZ.
And that's
That's
simply,
where I've got the
that's
problem.
simply because when we made the consideration for C4LD, we were still in the financial year that we had paid for. This is about the next financial year. The bill has now arrived, so council has the opportunity to make a decision based on where we've been with this. So there's a perfect explanation as around how that timing occurred.
Yep, so then the second point to that was Councillor's Ford figure was again different to Councillor Hatfield's. So yes, didn't you quote 17,000 something?
It's $15,000 plus
$15,000
GST is what we paid for C4LD.
So it's just the recommendation here is a GST inclusive figure. So I made 15 plus GST equals 17,250, just to be consistent.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I just note my congratulations to Councillor Hatfield for a well developed speech. And I agree, plenty of thoughts gone onto that. Elected members, I sit with the Deputy Mayor on this. I was going to raise a substantial motion anyway to look at a part payment option. So I'm glad he's already done that. My reasoning behind this is that I support the partial payment because I believe this gives a clear message to local government New Zealand that we're deeply dissatisfied, yet it also enables us to stay in the tent as well, because I think there's much benefit for us to be in there. One is that we can also influence who the next president is, and we can give that vote that we would have. Otherwise, if we weren't in it, we wouldn't have that opportunity to vote. Also, too, if local government New Zealand chooses to kick us out because of a part payment, I'll tell you what, it's not us that look bad, it's actually local government New Zealand. So I'll just make that statement. It's better for us to stay in the tent, is my opinion at the bottom line, as outlined before, to influence. But I'm definitely in favour of partial payments in order to recoup the 15K plus GST back from the fee that was paid to Communities for Local Democracy. But I also, too, folks, completely understand and respect the decisions of individual members around the table. This is a really difficult little piece of work for us to go through, which is really distracting at the moment when there's so many pieces of policy and legislation that's literally tumbling out of central government at the moment. So I would just encourage your elected members that we be decisive about this and then get back to the business of actually watching what our government's up to at the moment. And I'll certainly leave it at that. But there's been some good points raised so far. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. It kind of reminds me of, I saw an interview in the Ngāia Mahuta the other day in her foreign affairs portfolio when someone said, why hadn't she expelled the Russian ambassador? And she said, well, if he's not in the country, we can't have dialogue. And I feel the same here. I think there's it's the National Council we're disappointed with, not the organisation. And how would we have access to government and to participate in all the things that we do if we pulled away altogether? But I certainly understand giving a loud, clear message. So I too would actually support the Deputy Mayor's view if he was to put that forward as a motion.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. Back to our decision in October last year, I made a comment at that time that I had no confidence, or the motion that we passed was that we had no confidence in the leadership of, well, we had no confidence in local government in New Zealand, but it was primarily directed at the leadership, that chair, the committee, the members of the board, and possibly the CEO as well. And to be fair, my opinion since then has not changed. I still have no further confidence, and unfortunately, in my opinion, nothing has improved. The leadership, the strategy is still poor and below par. And thinking of my personal involvement via this council with local government in New Zealand, there's two things that they primarily deliver to us. One is training, and two is the representation. And then thirdly, possibly the annual local government conference. In terms of the training, I have to confess that the training I've received from local government New Zealand has been not as good as other trainings that I've attended. And I have no problem if we didn't use their training services. In terms of representation, that one's been well covered already, and it's been absolutely disgraceful over the last 12 months in regards to the three waters. And then thirdly, the conference. I've been fortunate to attend two conferences. The first one in Auckland, as I said back in October, I really enjoyed. It was very positive, covered a whole lot of aspects of local government. The second one, extremely disappointing, frustrating in fact, and portrayed local government New Zealand under new leadership as a lapdog of the Labour Party. And that was very, very disappointing. So I came away from that very, very disheartened in the organisation. So look, to be honest, my favour would be for recommendation number 2, that we do not renew, but if other members support a reduced fee, I have some optimism that under new leadership, local government could be back to where it was before and represent us better. That shouldn't exclude us. If we withdrew completely, we could always rejoin later when that time comes. But yeah, I'm open option. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quarry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to fully support the comments of Councillor Ford, Hadfield and Campbell. I think they all have a very strong case and have put it forward very well. I'm not against setting up an alternate body. I believe the dissatisfaction that's displayed by councils that have joined the organisation is such that there is a serious lack of confidence in the leadership of local government New Zealand. And it's quite sad in that you can have dialogue, but if the ears aren't connected to the brain and they're not working and turned on, there is little point in having dialogue. Now, this has been proven for a long period of time that dialogue doesn't change. When individuals are determined on a course of action, contrary to what you're trying to pass on to them, it's simply you get to a stage where you walk away and say, okay, I've tried my best and it's time to move on and we try a different approach. I believe there's a third course of action, and that is by all means the cost of joining communities for local democracy is removed, full stop, that's gone. We've had to engage other professionals, another body to carry out the liaison and discussions we shouldn't have had to have engaged. It's quite simple as that. So that money's gone, full stop. The other remaining part of the payment, I believe, should be delayed. And it should be delayed 3 to 4 months so that we get to see the reaction of local government New Zealand to our statement. Now, that puts the ball back in their court. And so they can choose to do what they like with us. But unless we get a satisfactory return from local government, then that money will be gone as well. And we could possibly look at setting up an alternate body which represents the views of the 31 councils that have joined. So it's very disappointing to have to be in this situation. But when you are a client of an organisation that fails to listen to what you're telling, the only course of action you have to try and remedy that course of action is to stop paying them. And then all of a sudden people sit up and listen. And sadly, the piper calls the tune. In this case, it is the piper playing what he wants. And that's not acceptable. So until people, the only course of action that will be effective is the removal of funds. And until we embark on that case, nothing will change. So there is a serious lack of confidence in the leadership of local government New Zealand. I fully support the removal of the fees that we've paid to the communities for local democracy. Fully support that. And like I say, the remaining funds can either be held back for 4 months, or if there's sufficient support around the table, we'll forget about our membership for a year and we'll just carry on. I don't believe being outside of local government, local government New Zealand is going to affect this council one iota. So,
thank you. I'll just make a couple of comments there. I support all the comments that have been made, but having been at the coalface of discussions with LGNZ, last year when we had our motion, the majority vote was to renew our membership and send a strong letter to LGNZ, which we did, along with a number of other councils, and clearly that fell on deaf ears. The other point is that if we delay any payment, we would not be able to vote at this year's AGM or attend conferences. That you need to decide whether that's an issue for us or not. And the other thing to note is that the president, there will need to be some changes on National Council following the local body elections this year, because there are at least a couple of mayors on there that are retiring, and if the others don't get back in, of course that will need another vote. And the chair of LGNZ, president, he has a 3-year term which doesn't come up until the 1st of July next year. So I'm very comfortable, and also to add, you know, we have gone to great lengths to warn LGNZ of the disquiet amongst members. We've had several Zoom meetings with them, and we have tried our absolute best to signal that the membership is not happy and we've got nowhere. In fact, some of the comments that we got back, in my view, were disgusting. So I fully support the fact that we withdraw the C4LD funding. We can renew it at any time, and that puts a very clear message, and also puts the ball in their court about what happens now. If we're only paid up, will they come back and say, well, you're not a member, or you are a member? It'll be interesting to see how they react to it. But given that we wrote the letter last year and got nowhere, we need to take this a step further. Councillor Belsky.
I completely agree with you and with Andrew on the other councillors that spoke in support of withdrawing. I've been bailed up. I cannot justify to our ratepayers. They've asked me what are we getting out of it, and I can't even explain. I haven't been to any teaching. I haven't been anywhere in the last 3 years. So quite frankly, they need a message, and Timaru has been praised up for their decision from so many people. And as I represent the ratepayer has bailed me up, and they said, what justification have you got to, and you tell me for this money that I'm paying, not you, I'm paying. Well, I'm paying as well, but they're unrepentant. They've had a message from the whole country in general, Federated farmers right through to signs on the side of the road get out of the three waters, and yet they are so unrepentant. They have not even budged. They've not even done anything, and I think it's an indictment on their intelligence to not listen to those that pay their wages. So I'm absolutely against paying any part of this next instalment.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Otherwise, is there someone brave enough to put the recommendation?
Well, I'll make the recommendation. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Ford.
Can I put my motion? Is that acceptable? I move that the Manawatū District Council renews its membership with Local Government New Zealand, however, reduces the amount of the subscription paid by $17,250, including GST, from $44,943.18, including GST, to $27,693.18, including GST, being the $15,000 plus GST that Manawatū District Council has paid to join Communities for Local Democracy in order to have an organisation to represent Manawatū District Council's views and advocate to government on Manawatū District Council's behalf.
Thank you. And Councillor Casey, is that a second in the motion? It is. Thank you. What we'd like to do is just take a moment, please, just to get the wording of this recommendation correct, just to tidy it up. And
on the screen.
thank you. If you could do that, appreciate it.
Anyone's welcome to help with the tidying up.
Yeah. It got quite long.
Just want to be clear. So
That's absolutely fine. That's the gist of it, but if anyone can reword it better, that's fine.
Councillor Quarry.
Could I make a suggestion, and we split it into two parts? The first part is whether we pay the 17,000, and that becomes a yes or a no, we pay that. The second part is whether we wish to remain within LGNZ, and that becomes a second subsequent motion. So we separate the two. One, the money's gone, and that's final, whether we remain in LGNZ or we delay paying the remaining membership amount. So there's two parts to it.
So the motion that Councillor Ford's putting forward is to say we would renew our membership with a reduced fee.
Well, I think the membership should be a separate issue. Whether we're in or out is a separate issue, but the money that's demanded for as a subscription, the amount of 17,000 be completely removed, whether we are a member or not.
That's pretty much what we're doing now, isn't it, through your worship?
Yeah, and we do have a motion that's been moved and seconded, so we just get, and if that's lost, we'll go back to the others. The other that we've got there.
I think the point you have to remember here is that there's not a separate membership application or yes, no. It's the paying of the subscription that makes you a member.
That's correct.
So if you don't pay the subscription, you're not a member. If you pay the subscription, you are. If you pay the subscription in part, well, that's remains to be seen.
Well, I think your worship, if I may, the important thing around that was that putting to one side my initial preference is that actually what it seems the majority of colleagues are saying is that we deduct the fee, and actually that's up because at the end of the day, then Local Government New Zealand have to come back and say, will they accept us as members on that basis or will they not? And I think it is far more powerful if we let them make that decision than us tell them. So that would be, in terms of what Councillor Quarry was suggesting, I think we best to put the onus back on them and let them do the hard yards. And I think that would be the benefit of actually withdrawn the fee. But while I'll wait until we're allowed to talk on that motion for my next point.
Thank you, councillor Marsh.
Can I speak for the motion?
Well, yes, the motion has been put, we're just tidying up.
It's a general, and to be fair, I don't have an issue with the motion. I think that probably is the way to go. Having said that, I don't think that it can be workable going forward. And I know that it'll be in their court. So I'm just throwing that up there. And that was why I made my initial comment around tabling this document, because we need to know what we're going to do going forward. Because if we just take out our membership because of what we've paid to communities for local democracy, again, how are they going to attribute that or allocate it to any particular topic? So if we want a remit on transport or something to go forward, will they still not allow us to do that? Or will they say, oh no, because you didn't pay us for the 3 water, you can only not be a part of that? I just don't see how it's going to be workable from there.
Well, to be fair, Councillor Marsh, it's actually irrelevant until local government New Zealand respond to what we decide.
It's very relevant about how I make my decision today, because I can't see that they'll come back with a workable option.
So, well, it's the old story. You will never know what you don't know until you know.
And the words that I put forward were, this is our way of making a very clear protest against what has happened. We've tried sending the letter, we've tried discussions, we've had open conversation, it's got nowhere. So in my view, this is the next step. And quite frankly, yes, it puts the ball firmly in their court. What are they going to do about us and any other potential councils that do the same thing? Councillor Campbell.
Well, Steve was first, I think.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I'll just echo councillor Marsh's comments a bit. They might say thank you for the part payment. Until you pay the full amount, it's irrelevant. We are going to keep the money, and so you actually are not full participant of them. I'm just a bit concerned about when they receive our part payment, they might say thank you very much. You're no part of us anyway.
We won't send the payment. What we will do is we will write to New Zealand requesting a new invoice.
Oh, okay.
And then we will pay the invoice. So if they refuse to issue the invoice, then we aren't going to say there won't be any money going anywhere until such time as we get an invoice.
Thanks.
Councillor Campbell.
Just one point I think I should make is by not being a member of local government New Zealand, I don't think it restricts us from advocating on behalf of any national or regional issue at all. Because if we have a topic that we want support from Ruapehu or Horowhenua or Tararua, Palmerston North, we will just go and talk to those councils and advocate, generate some support from them. The only advantage of LGNZ is to have a whole national organisation that can quickly liaise with all 60 councils. And look, we could still do that anyway. All we need is the email addresses for those mayors, which we have, and we contact them directly. We can do that role, which we've proven that we have the ability to do, because this council has been leading the charge in terms of committees for local democracy. Look, we simply don't need LGNZ.
And if I may, I totally agree with Councillor Campbell's comments. What affects me is the fact that we've paid 15,000 plus GST to communities for local democracy. If we have another issue that we want to take further, is that going to require another cost going forward? And how quickly will we get to the 44,000 that we're putting forward as membership to LGNZ? That's my hesitation.
We'll never know. You don't know.
No, I don't. That makes my decision today relevant.
Ali, can we just change the word "for" to the number 4 to get the name correct? Communities for Local Democracy. Thank you.
So just for clarity, I'll split it into 2 parts. So the first part is about subscription, which is using membership LGNZ, but reduces the amount of subscription by 70,015 for GST from the subscription amount of which is then makes a total subscription of 27,000. So that's that. But Then the next bit is that 70,000 payment made, and explains why we reduced the 70,000 in order for an organisation representing CPUs with pre-audit reforms and advertising. So we deducted from that amount.
So that's,
As mover, I'm happy with that.
thank you. Now, who was our seconder?
Shane Casey.
Shane, are you
Councillor
happy
Casey.
with the amended words? Excellent, thumbs up there. Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Hadfield.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I don't want to keep going on. You'll be getting sick of me by lunchtime.
No, yesterday, mate.
I hold the view that, as I said at the end of my thing, other and real costs. And it would be my conclusion, without actually having a total understanding of, is that our council, through Her Worship, has actually probably had to front up considerable other expense over and above the C4LD subscription that we all agreed to pay. And I think the words I used were, whatever they were, other associated and real costs of funding an alternative course of advocacy. And I don't know what sort of money that the council would have incurred, Your Worship, on some of your travel costs and other costs in chasing and advocating actually on behalf of our community to maintain the integrity in the process of democracy. And quite frankly, I would actually like to see those costs also deducted. That's my view. However, I'm absolutely willing to head down a consensus path that at a minimum does what has been recommended.
Thank you. And I just to add to that I guess, is this about the actual amount of money that we've incurred that you could argue LGNZ should have done, or is this about making a strong protest against LGNZ?
If I may, Your Worship, I do concur that that's a very valid comment. But I think the important thing is that we continue to indicate to our community that actually, as a council, we do actually support the process of democracy. And local government New Zealand has failed our community on that basis, as I thought I rather eloquently said, actually. But if I just may say. But I do take your point, and if elected members are happy that we actually just proceed by making a significant statement, I'm happy to support that.
Thank goodness for that, Councillor Hatfield.
Thank you, Councillor Casey.
Thank you. Councillor Short.
Thank you. And the other thing that I would be concerned about if we pulled away right away at this point is the message it actually gives to central government. I mean, we know the topic that has divided us, but if they see local government, you know, all helter-skelter, we're going to play right into their hands. We've got an election next year. There's lots of policy review coming right at us. And if we don't look like a strong organisation, they'll have even more reason to centralise policy away from us.
That's already happened, Councillor Short. Communities for Local Democracy have been in the face of all of the political parties and the minister many times, so they are well aware that there are at least 31 councils who do not support LGNZ's view. Unfortunately, that's already occurred. Councillor Quarry.
Is there any possibility of additional costs in regard to communities for local democracy? Is there another demand for $5,000, $10,000?
At the moment, no.
Okay. The second is for the remaining subscription, do we get an opportunity to vote on that in the future? Like if they come back with another invoice, is it automatically paid, or will it come back to the table to discuss in regard to any actions that LGNZ does do in regard to this?
Well, if we pass these motions here, we're saying that we're okay to pay the reduced fee if LG, and it will depend what the response from LGNZ is, but if they accept our motion here, that's what we pay the remainder. If
Well,
they come back with, no, that doesn't work like that, that will need to come back to us for further discussion.
Well, I'd like to see the opportunity to discuss any response from them before we pay the remainder.
Thank you. And we're wondering if we should add a third part to this motion, that we instruct the Chief Executive to write to LGNZ with the explanation around the motion that we're looking to pass today. So we instruct him to do that and seeking feedback from LGNZ and requesting a new invoice.
Well, like I say, I'd like to see us debate their response before any further monies are paid.
Through you, Your Worship, if I may.
Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you. I support where Councillor Quarry is coming from, and I think the nature of the debate today and the emphasis that's here is that yes, by default, it would come back to the table for further discussion. If they came back with another invoice or discussed or demanded otherwise, whatever the outcome would be. But I think it would be safe to say that we'll be discussing this in what we do.
Councillors, the motion you have on the table is that if LGNZ were to amend the invoice to the amount of $27,693.80, it would be paid.
Yeah.
That's it. If they come back with anything else, then it will come back to council.
Correct.
That's the way it's formulated.
Correct. Okay, so if there's no further discussion, we have those. Do we need to instruct you to?
Well, I think just to tidy up the motion, there should be a third point that says council instructs the CE to write to Local Government New Zealand requesting an amended invoice and giving an explanation as to why we are proposing a reduced subscription.
Something along those lines. So is our mover and seconder supportive of that addition?
Yes, supportive, Your Worship.
Thank you.
So supportive, and just a final word addressing an issue. I think this motion is all about a protest, and the $15,000 or 15 plus GST is a figure that everyone can sort of relate to. And if we sort of add in extra costs, it suddenly becomes hard to understand where that came from, etc. So I'm very much in favour of perhaps just keeping it at the simple. It's 15,000 and it relates to that fee paid to communities for local democracy, that people can, oh, right, okay, I understand that.
Yep.
So, and just in support of that, it also is in line with other councils we know of that are considering this as an option as well. Thanks, Ellie. No, the third part of it is instructing our CE to write to LGNZ. So on that basis, let's put those recommendations that you just saw, they've been moved and seconded. I'll put those motions, all those in favour, please say aye or raise your hand. Thank you. Against? Councillor Marsh, Councillor Belsky, do you want your votes to be recorded?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Those motions are carried.
Wish, if I may just pick up on a comment, you just said as far as any extra funding for communities for local democracy, at the moment, no extra. So just picked up on that comment because when that motion came forward to council, I seeked an assurance that there would be no extra costs.
We had no idea what Councillor Marsh, what the future holds, what action, depending on where government goes with this, the select committee process, etc. At the moment, our budget is for what we know, and for what we know, we are not seeking any additional funding.
Good. And to that, I would just remind Councillor Ford's comment to me around the document that we signed, stipulating that would be no extra.
Thank you. Right. let's move on. Page 67, 11.6. This is our submission to the draft National Adaptation Plan. And welcome, Lisa. Again, thank you for your great work on all of these submissions and the opportunity for us to have a look at this. I know that some councillors have provided some feedback to you, but I'll hand it over to you just to take us through the highlights.
Okay, good morning, Your Worship, councillors, colleagues. The report in front of you today is seeking your feedback on the draft submission to the National Adaptation Plan and feedback on proposals for managed retreat and flood insurance that will inform the drafting of legislation, including the Climate Adaptation Act. Would you like me to give you an overview of what the National Adaptation Plan is all about, or are we satisfied that we're comfortable with that?
Thank you. Seeking from elected members, are you comfortable with our understanding of the adaptation plan, or would you like Lisa to go through and highlight the key points of that? It could be worth actually going through those,
sure,
because this is only really the start of a process that we'll need to be involved in, so it could be worth having that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so the National Adaptation Plan sets the direction for how New Zealand will respond to the unavoidable impacts of climate change and address key climate risks up to 2028. Once finalised, the National Adaptation Plan will sit alongside the Emissions Reduction Plan, and together they will lay out how New Zealand will respond to climate change. The plan sets out a proposed future work programme indicating government's priorities for the next 6 years. It sets a long-term vision and high-level goals for adaptation action. Also included in this consultation are proposals to support managed retreat and develop options for home flood insurance. A managed retreat involves the relocation of assets, activities and sites of significance away from at-risk areas within a planned period of time. The Climate Adaptation Act, which is part of the Resource Management Act reforms, will provide the tools and processes to plan and implement managed retreat. And the Ministry was also wanting feedback on how insurance could interact with that managed retreat policy. And now, I guess our draft submission is in response to the draft National Adaptation Plan. It's divided into different topic areas. So the submission sort of starts with some background information on the Manawatū district and the implications of climate change for our economy and for iwi Māori. The second part of the submission outlines those actions that MDC is already taking in response to climate change impacts, which include our environmental strategy, climate change risk prioritisation, increasing the resilience of our infrastructure, financial buffers and resilience funds, and land use planning through the district plan review. The third part of the submission provides feedback on the draft National Adaptation Plan, and it's split into the different focus areas that are included in that plan. So there's things about, we sort of talk about the overarching vision and the priorities in the plan, and then we provide some responses around those different focus areas. So if you like, I can give you some more detail on that. I've got quite a lot of notes in front of me, but I don't want to sort of harp on if everyone's read the submission and are comfortable with that.
Okay, does anyone need any more detail on that?
Well, I think, Your Worship, if I may, the actually 146 pages of in the draft National Adaptation Plan was rather torturous. Yeah. I think that's probably the only way I can describe it.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Lisa, for yet another huge piece of policy work here, through the G and through Kathy. It's been a couple of days in virtual conference, folks, with the 19 policies and countless points raised through that from central government. We can see what we're doing in this space. We can see what funding that we're putting into it. I'd like to, through the council, have a comment there, Lisa, in regards to our expectations that central government will be supporting local government brackets MDC, through responsible and appropriate resourcing for all these things that we're doing. We can't keep, it was very clear Monday and Tuesday that local government or Aotearoa New Zealand cannot keep paying for this for central government policies. We just simply don't have the money or the capacity of resourcing to do it. So and I'm sure you're much better around the wording than myself, Lisa, is around to that we would expect some sort of consideration for resourcing for these, if I may. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Casey. Are you saying that's in addition to the comments we make on that at the bottom of page 80?
Could you allow me a moment, Your Worship, just to go to the bottom of page 80, please?
We do raise concerns about the difficulty and costs of implementing it, and we say that it is unaffordable and unachievable for MDC. So I'm reading that kind of covers what you're saying, but I may be wrong.
Well, yeah, no, thank you, Your Worship, and for pointing that out as well. There has been a fog of war in my house in regards to reading documents at the moment. So thanks for highlighting that. But yes, no, I would still reinforce the point that that local government or MDC would expect some financial resourcing around that. If we don't, and I say that because if we don't set the expectations, they're not going to know. So we've got to be quite clear moving forward. And I think this is a message for all of local government about this pushback on central government's expectations. You want it, you've got to start funding it. And I think we need to be quite clear in that. Thank you.
Thank you. So are you comfortable with how we've worded that, or are you saying it should be stronger?
If I may, Your Worship, probably some slightly stronger language through Kathy DeLisa in regards to central government resourcing this financially. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments in relation to the whole draft? No? As usual, Lisa's done an excellent job. Councillor Ford.
It really adds no value, but just thanks very much, Lisa. I think it's an outstanding piece of work you've done. I read it through thinking I was going to fall asleep, but actually it was really interesting, and I think you've done us proud, so thank you.
Lisa.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to say it was a team effort. It wasn't only me. There were a lot of my colleagues involved. We sort of, dished out the different topics and pulled it all together. So I don't want to take full credit for this work. But just in response, I guess, to the comments from Councillor Casey, it was quite clear in the conference Monday, Tuesday this week that going forward, I think central government is not expecting to be paying for this, particularly on an ongoing basis. I think they are expecting costs to be shared across, local government and community. And I guess that's, our concern is around affordability for our community. So I will make sure that I reinforce that point. I was also wondering whether it would be valuable to include an executive summary or a list of key recommendations at the start of the submission, because I'm just conscious that it takes a while till we actually get to the feedback on the actual adaptation plan itself, because we sort of provide a lot of background and context on what we're doing, which is several pages worth. So I was just proposing to put a list of key recommendations or key points at the front, so I could include Councillor Casey's comment within that. And just there were a couple of highlighted percentages that were missing. I've now got those figures from Agneta in our GIS team. So the percentage of Māori owned land in our district is approximately 1%. She said about 0.94%. So I was proposing to put 1% in there. And about 84% of that land is adjacent to a waterway, which is sort of rivers and streams. And about 17.65% of Māori owned land is within flood channel zoning in the district plan. So just sort of interested in feedback whether to include the flood channel zoning figure as well, or just to effectively fill in those highlighted blanks with the 1% and the 84%.
I think the more we highlight our situation, the better. Would that be the view of other members, that we would include that stat as well? Not hearing anything against that, so yes, if we could include that.
Sure. And then there was some correspondence regarding the submission from the Climate Action Joint Committee, which we did provide some information to them and when they were drafting that submission. Was there anything that you would like included regarding that submission? Any notes of agreement or objection to what was proposed in that submission or in the LGNZ submission? I haven't seen a copy of the LGNZ submission, but they have circulated some key points, which I am happy to read out if that would be useful. I understand Taitura is also lodging a submission, but I haven't seen a copy of that and it's not on their website either. So I don't know whether anyone else has received a copy of the Taitura submission, because ordinarily we would sort of look at those submissions as well and see whether we wanted to note any support for those.
Is there anything in the LGNZ one that you don't think we've covered in ours?
I guess their first point is that they think the draft National Adaptation Plan lacks ambition. So I guess for us, we've sort of just responded to that plan in terms of how it relates to our district. But I haven't sort of looked at it in terms of whether it's strong enough in terms of what we're trying to achieve as a nation. I
guess you could argue, is that our role, or is our role to put the case for the Manawatū district?
Yeah, I think our submission is probably robust enough that I don't think we need to go there. In terms of the rest of it, yeah, they've just sort of asked they wanted more certainty around how government will support the sector to do adaptation planning and decision making, including nationally consistent guidance and how to have those hard conversations with communities on the need for options for adaptation. They've noted that it's virtually silent on how the costs of adaptation will be met. So that's sort of drawing on Councillor Casey's points earlier in saying that it's critical that central government comes to the party with funding and helps to catalyse urgent investment in resilience. And note that we can't keep relying on post-natural hazard event reactionary measures. And that was a sort of a point we tried to raise in our submission around how the focus on emergency management is not really the right place to be focusing, because emergency management is by nature a reactive thing. And if we're wanting to increase resilience, that's probably better done through land use planning. But I guess until we see the new Adaptation Act, it's hard to know what that will mean. So we can, that will become part of the RMA reforms. And they've just asked how it aligns with the Resource Management Act reforms. So they're concerned that the Climate Change Adaptation Act is on a slower track than the other pieces of RMA reform legislation. And that was a point that was raised again at the conference this week, that really there is the feeling that the adaptation stuff should come first, and that the land use planning components of the RMA should then give effect to that, but it seems to be coming in the reverse direction. So that's essentially their points.
That last one's a really valid point. Have we covered that at all in here? Because we've seen that we've seen that message with everything, but the cart or the horse.
I can't recall. I will double check. I know that we have asked how it fits with the other consultations in relation to insurance. And we've sort of mentioned in relation to the national policy statements. But yeah, I will double check whether we have anything in there around the order of the RMA reforms and just the relationship.
I think it is a good point to include if we haven't made reference to it.
Yes.
Any further comments from the team? Councillor Campbell.
This might be a bit minor, but on page 84, you've got a risk assessment for the high risk, and I tend to agree with everything there, but I just wanted to question the sea level rise rationale for that being a factor now. I'm not aware of any significant coastal erosion happening in our district at the moment. There may be some in decades, but got any comment on that?
That's a good point, because I recall last time we discussed this, Councillor Ford used the Hyderabad ruins on the beach as a classic example of the opposite.
Of the ocean retreating.
Yes.
I would suggest that sea level rise should be in the orange column within decades rather than now. But that's my thoughts, but you're the experts, not me.
Well, I would concur with that, Councillor Campbell.
Quite clearly, we are getting extreme weather events. That's, we have them every year. But sea level rise, not yet.
Wasn't there a report stating, the East Coast is going down and the West Coast is going up?
And given we're on the West Coast, you would say why have you got that in there now? Can you remember the thinking behind why it's sitting there?
Through your worship, I was not directly, I was only sort of indirectly involved in the risk prioritisation work. But maybe if Kathy, if you have anything to add on that, or I can go back to those that were directly involved and provide some feedback on that.
Your worship, it relates to Tangi Moana and Himetangi. But I don't know the level of detail as to how they landed, that it's not how they landed, but it's going to be within the next now or within years in their assessment. So we can come back to you on that one. There is a description that sits just under the actual matrix table, but not providing enough level of detail. Massey University is doing a project with Tangi Moana, which Councillor Short can probably provide more information than me, which is just progressing and I think being funded through the Deep South project, and looking around at resilience to make sure the community understands, I think, some of the challenges there as well. But Councillor Short can provide more detail.
Thank you. They've only just got confirmation that they have got funding. Because it's been a bit of a challenging time to consult with communities, the Tangi Moana community decided that the Deep South project would be in the Tangi Moana school would be the point of contact, and they're going to do it from the children's point of view of what it's like growing up in a community, knowing that they will be facing climate change hazards in the future.
Thank you. So I guess, Lisa, what you're hearing is there is a bit of questioning around the table about whether sea level rise should sit in the red column or be moved to the orange column.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I will follow up on that and get back to you on that today.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
My previous comments were in relation to Waitariri, and there could well be a difference between Tangi Moana and Himetangi and Waitariri. I don't know.
Thank you. Anything further in the draft that anyone wishes to raise? If not, there is a recommendation on page 67. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please.
Happy to move that, Your Worship. It's right here in front of me, if you like.
Thank you. So that's moved. Councillor Casey, seconded. Councillor Marsh. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? That motion is carried. So again, well done, Lisa, Kathy and your team. So please pass on our thanks for all the good work in that. And no doubt there'll be plenty more in this space to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, everyone.
Right, we have no late items to consider. So we get to item 13, public excluded business. And I will move that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely the confirmation of minutes, the fielding and district promotion, incorporated consideration of proposal. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ford. Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Raise your hand. Thank you. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Just take a moment for Ellie to